The case of Sheila Love, a monster with an angelic appearance. Psychological and physical traumas received at an early age can have a very unpredictable effect on adult life. Of course, far from always, they lead to the fact that a person becomes cruel and seeks to hurt others. But sometimes it is the trauma can give rise to a real monster. Criminal psychologist Adrian Raine believes that there are genetic and psychophysical mechanisms that can turn a person into a cold-blooded killer, about which he wrote in detail in his book Anatomy of Violence. History knows a lot of serial criminals who had a truly hellish childhood, and perhaps to them can be attributed our heroine today, Sheila Love. This woman had an angelic appearance which she skillfully used, seducing her victims and then brutally murdered them. Despite the fact that the court was able to prove only 2 of her crimes, criminologists are sure that there were many more. And now let's look at this difficult story from the beginning and try to understand whether Sheila Love was a born monster or became him as a result of the cruelty that she faced in childhood. Who is Sheila Love? Sheila Love was born in 1958, the 4th of July, in the small country town of Fort Payne, Alabama. She was the youngest of 3 children of her parents and was raised with her brother and sister Lynn. Her childhood was spent in a picturesque but rather secluded place, on a farm nestled among cornfields. According to the memories of Lynn's older sibling, Sheila was an active, inquisitive, and open-minded girl with a creative streak. She liked to be in the center of attention, had a good voice and cute appearance, so perhaps, if her life had turned out differently, she would have become a famous actress or singer. But instead of bright posters, her name decorated the pages of criminal chronicles. The unimaginable cruelty of her father. The head of the family, Manuel Bailey, for many years suffered from alcohol addiction, although it would be more accurate to say that his addiction suffered from his entire family. He often went on binges, turning into a real beast who enjoyed abusing his wife and children. He insulted and humiliated them, beat them with anything that came to hand, could throw everyone out in the middle of the night in a downpour or frost, and locked himself in the house, not letting anyone inside. Mothers, daughters, and sons often had to spend the night in a barn or in the open air in the field. One day, when Manuel was once again in a drunken rage, he began throwing dishes and other objects at his family members. The mother tried to cover the children as best she could, but one of the flower pots thrown by her husband hit her youngest daughter Sheila in the head. Sheila suffered a serious concussion and a lifelong scar on her temple, which she painstakingly covered with her hair. But not even the insults and beatings were the worst thing that the sisters had to endure in their parents' home. According to the memories of Sheila and Lynn, Manuel from an early age forcibly inclined them to intimacy. The mother may have been aware of what was going on, but the subject was never broached. However, despite the nightmare at home, Sheila did well enough in school. She dreamed of leaving the farm as soon as possible and go to conquer the big city. The girl was quite ambitious and determined. She passionately wanted to realize her childhood dream in life and become an actress or pop singer. And she had everything for this: charisma, bright appearance, and a beautiful voice, adulthood, first marriage. Barely Sheila was 18 years old. She left her parents' home, but adult life was not so joyful. To enter the university, she was not allowed to average score, and to move to the big city, she simply did not have the money. Then Sheila got a job as a maid in one of the hotels, where by that time her older sister was already working. It should be noted that Sheila had a slender figure and a very attractive appearance. She had big blue eyes, a charming smile, and a mop of thick long hair. She was surrounded by attention from men, and over time she learned to use it and manipulate her suitors. In the late 70s, Love, then Bailey, met a guy named Jonathan Baxter, and a romantic relationship began between them. Jonathan was not yet 20 years old at the time, but he already had a young daughter from a previous relationship. However, the child did not become a hindrance, and soon the couple got married. However, this marriage lasted only a few months and collapsed after Jonathan learned that the young wife abused his daughter while he disappeared at work. Sheila was frankly annoyed with the child, and she would raise her hand or lock her in a closet if she started crying or acting up. Jonathan did not organize scandals and listen to explanations. He just Strazoot filed for divorce and put his wife with his belongings outside his house. He never wanted to see or hear from her again. After the divorce, Sheila dated various men and mostly lived off them, but all these relationships were fleeting and lasted from a few weeks to a couple of months, until in the early 80s she met her future second husband, Ronnie Jennings. The tumultuous romance soon led to marriage, and Sheila took on a double last name, Bailey Jennings. It was an unhealthy relationship between two irascible and unstable people who regularly cheated on each other, scandalized, and even fought. Still, their marriage lasted more than 3 years. In 1984, after another family quarrel, Sheila demanded a divorce from her husband, but he refused her. In fact, Ronnie did not hold on to their relationship at all. He just wanted to piss off his wife and make her mad, and he succeeded. Sheila became hysterical, took a large number of drugs in front of her husband, drinking strong alcohol, and after this infernal cocktail, sat behind the wheel of the car and rushed down the road. Naturally, soon Sheila, under the influence of pills and alcohol, lost consciousness, flew off the road, and at high speed crashed into a tree. She miraculously survived, but suffered a massive head injury. She spent more than a week in a deep coma, and doctors made no prognosis. When Sheila finally regained consciousness and gradually recovered, she was transferred to a psychiatric hospital where she spent several months. She later complained to her sister that one of the orderlies was constantly harassing her and possibly taking advantage of her helpless state when she was heavily sedated. After all this, Sheila returned to her second husband's home, but began to behave not just aggressively, but threateningly toward him. When during another scandal she attacked Ronnie and poked him in the chest with nail scissors, Ronnie, fearing for his own life and health, filed for divorce and hurriedly moved out of the mad woman. Rich lover. When the second marriage was dissolved, the young woman began looking for lovers through the dating columns of the print media, and she left her ads there as well. But no man did not stay with her for long, because Sheila tended to dominate everything, rigidly suppressing their partners both in intimate and everyday life. Soon the photo of an attractive girl in the dating section drew the attention of 60-year-old Wilfred Bill LaBar. The man had previously been married twice and had adult children and grandchildren from previous marriages. He was widowed a few years ago and had been living alone on his large country ranch ever since. Bill was a fairly wealthy man. He had a chiropractic office in Etna, New Hampshire, and on the ranch he raised horses. At the same time, he was very lonely and needed a strong, powerful woman. In fact, that's exactly what he found. Sheila was attracted by the wealth of her new acquaintance, and she decided that it would be an ideal union for her. And to make Bill completely lost his head, she began to send him a postal mail frank letters, supplementing them with her nude photos. The trap worked, and soon LaBar invited a charming pen pal to visit his ranch. Their romance developed rapidly. An elderly man is not stingy on expensive gifts for a young mistress, and in the summer of 1987, she moved to live with him. This has incredibly flattered the doctor, who now went out in public with a beautiful companion who was half his age and was fit for him as a daughter. Nevertheless, he did not plan to marry Sheila. However, Sheila, not waiting for a marriage proposal, changed her name, calling herself LaBar. Bill was surprised by this turn of events, but he did not object. Sheila began to interfere in all the affairs of her elderly lover, starting to control his business, finances, and disposition of his property. In addition, Bill was getting older and could not satisfy the intimate needs of a young woman. Then, according to Sheila herself, he allowed her to meet other men, whom she often brought directly to their home. One of Sheila's regular lovers, closer to the mid-90s, was a Jamaican national named Wayne Ennis. He was much younger than Sheila and was initially hired as an au pair on the ranch, but soon the young man, with Bill's consent, which was probably given under pressure from Sheila, moved to live in the owner's house. In 1995, Sheila and Wayne officially legalized their relationship, and the spouse considered that from now on, he would be her only man. But soon he realized that he was wrong, because his wife continued to meet with different men. Wayne was not satisfied with this, and one day he jumped with fists on Sheila and her next lover, causing them bodily harm. Accustomed to being dominated, Sheila for the first time didn't know how to deal with her third husband, who got into a fight every time a rival appeared on the horizon. Eventually, she filed for divorce and sought a court injunction to stop Wayne from approaching her, accusing him of violence and assault. Another divorce did not affect the turbulent personal life of Sheila, who continued to meet with numerous lovers, changing them like gloves. True, now her relationship increasingly often began to end with lawsuits from men who accused Sheila not just in cruelty, but also in the threat to their lives and health. Thus, one of her boyfriends she deliberately hit by a car and almost ran over. Another almost broke his head, and another scratched his face so that he was forever scarred. Sheila, with age, became more and more dangerous to others. From every man she demanded obedience, and in cases of disobedience, fell into a rage. In 2000, at the age of 74, Bill LaBar died of heart failure. Although doctors and police officers did not see a criminal trail in the death of an elderly man, his family members were convinced that Sheila had something to do with it. In their opinion, she had been poisoning Bill little by little for years and literally drove him into the light. Despite the fact that Bill and Sheila were never officially married, Sheila, according to the will, became the sole heiress of all his property. The relatives tried to challenge this through the courts, but never got anywhere. They are still convinced that the mistress forced Bill to write the will she wanted. House of Temptation. After Bill's death, as I have already mentioned, all his property came under Sheila's complete control. Now she no longer had to consider anyone's opinion. She could do whatever she wanted with the estate she had inherited. She herself called her home a place of seduction and pleasure, where there were no inhibitions. She met men on the streets, in bars, on the internet, lured them to her, and then tried to keep them on the ranch as long as possible. She didn't care about their age, skin color, or any physical appearance. She promised them unearthly pleasure, and then sought to suppress and subjugate them to her will. Sheila regularly tried to seduce couriers by meeting them in the nude and offering an alternative method of payment. But she didn't take into account the fact that she herself was not getting any younger and was nowhere near as attractive as she used to be. They got to the point where couriers simply refused to come to her address. Neighbors noticed that on the ranch LaBar constantly come different men, but some hurried to leave the place the same day. Others were delayed, but also for a short time. What was going on in the house itself could only be guessed at. Where had Michael DeLorge disappeared to? Soon, Sheila decided to look for lovers among men who were in dire need of housing, money, or those men who suffered from addiction. This category was the most vulnerable and proved to be an easy prey for the cunning woman, who everywhere posed as a widowed millionaire and talked about her untold wealth inherited by her. In 2004, LaBar met on one of the city streets a homeless man named Michael DeLodge. He was in a difficult life situation and lost literally everything because of addiction to illegal drugs. His relatives tried to send him to a rehabilitation clinic, but he ran away from there and has been loitering ever since. Sheila liked Michael, and she invited him to her, promising shelter, food, and the necessary drugs in exchange for intimacy. Moving to the ranch, the guy was completely dependent on his old mistress. He complied with all her demands, afraid to be on the street again. But Sheila quickly got into the taste, and her desires became more and more sophisticated. She bound, beat, and humiliated Michael, taking pleasure in it. He tried to escape several times, walking dozens of miles and hiding in homeless shelters, but he never decided to go to the police for fear they wouldn't believe him. Meanwhile, Sheila found him each time and brought him back to the ranch. In desperation, he tried to contact his family members and let them know he was in trouble. His loved ones immediately responded to this disturbing news, but it was too late. In October 2005, Michael DeLorge disappeared without a trace. When his family contacted Sheila directly, she stated that she and Michael had broken up. He had left her, and his current whereabouts were unknown to her. Michael did not show up at any of the places he had been to before. No one who knew him had seen him, and there was no way to contact him. Contacting the police was fruitless, and LaBar remained beyond suspicion, trusting Kenny Towdy. Sheila's tales of her exorbitant wealth were greatly exaggerated, and the house and automobile had to be maintained, so she was forced to get a job. Naturally, Sheila chose an occupation to her liking. She became an operator of internet phone services. Since she had a truly enchanting voice, men fell for the bait and offered to meet her in person. Among such guys was Kenny County, who at the time of their acquaintance was barely 24 years old. The young man was attractive in appearance, very good-natured and open. However, he had a low IQ level, due to which he was very gullible. This was exactly the kind of guy Labar was looking for. Kenny was very close to his mother, on whom he actually depended, but Sheila, with the help of clever manipulations, managed to break this connection and literally lure Kenny to herself. She made him an unforgettable night of love and promised that they would be like this all the time. The young man decided that he had met the woman of his dreams, about which he informed his relatives, and then moved to live in Sheila's house. But soon Sheila showed the guy her true face, having arranged for him a real torture room in one of the rooms. Each time, intimacy inevitably turned into a brutal beating or something worse. Kenny's body was covered with bruises, abrasions, scratches, cuts, and burn marks. But he could not leave the house of the mistress who had completely subjugated his will. Sheila did not allow him to see and communicate with his loved ones, and his family could only guess what was happening to Kenny. The first alarm was raised by neighbors who periodically noticed the guy and were horrified by his sickly appearance. A few days before his disappearance, a local store clerk took a picture of the young man on her cell phone camera, and later this picture was attached to the case file in court. In the photo, Kenny's condition could be described as deplorable. He was very thin, there were huge bruises under his eye and on his cheek, and his nose was probably broken. Judging by the degree of healing, all these injuries had been inflicted at different times, which suggested that the guy had been brutally beaten for a long time. The contents of his cart were also alarming. He rolled 2 large canisters of fuel to the cash register, as it later turned out, for his own cremation. The store employees were so puzzled and even frightened by the guy's appearance that they decided to report him to the police for possible domestic violence. But this time, Sheila managed to get away with it, and they could not charge her with anything. Soon Kenny stopped contacting his family altogether, and when his worried mother arrived at Labar's house, the owner behaved aggressively and advised to leave Kenny alone. All subsequent attempts ended similarly, at which point Kenny County's family filed a missing persons report with the police, indicating that he may be being held forcibly at the country ranch, a home crematorium, and gruesome findings. When police arrived at Sheila's home, she claimed that the young man no longer lived with her, and claimed that Kenny had run away because his mother, whom he was allegedly terrified of, began visiting them frequently. As evidence, Sheila provided an audio recording in which he asks her lover if his own mother had attacked him, and he quietly gives an affirmative answer. It all seemed more than strange, and the very next day, an officer visiting Sheila secured a search warrant for the estate. Sheila had been on the police's radar many times before, and her name had been linked to another mysterious disappearance of a boyfriend. But over the years, Sheila had never been questioned, and her house and grounds had never been searched. When the police arrived, they did not find Labar at home, but they did see several fires burning near the outbuildings. The fires looked strange and were made of improvised materials, a mattress, fragments of wooden furniture, hay, etc., all doused with a flammable mixture. One of the bonfires had bones in it that clearly looked like human remains. The squad requested reinforcements in the form of forensic experts, reporting all the findings. But that turned out to be just the tip of the iceberg compared to what they discovered next. Almost all over the house were found poorly washed traces of blood. It was so much that it seemed as if there had been a real massacre. It turned out that the blood belonged to at least 3 different people. The bones smoldering in the fire belonged to the missing Kenny, and there were 2 empty fuel cans lying nearby, the same ones the boy had bought at the local store the day before. But that wasn't all. Also found on the property were the remains of Michael Delage, who had disappeared a few years earlier, and some fingers of some third guy who was never identified. Among other things, a large number of items belonging, judging by the size, to various men were fished out of the sump at the ranch, the fates of which have not been learned. The hostess herself was not at home at the time of the police visit. She had figured it out and gone on the run. Sheila hitchhiked to Boston, where she obviously hoped to get lost. Moreover, on the way, she seduced one of the drivers who gave her a ride, and he trustingly invited her to live in his house. However, the next day, having seen on TV news about the search for a dangerous criminal, the new lover himself called the police and reported that Sheila is now in his bed. It was there that she was arrested. During the search of Sheila's home, another frightening find was made, a box of videotapes. On the tapes, Kenny, Michael, and several other men confessed to horrific crimes, but judging by the guy's appearance and condition, they made these confessions under torture. Since Labar's arrest, her mental health has raised a lot of questions, so the court ordered the necessary evaluations. Sheila was found to have a delusional disorder, as well as signs of schizophrenia. She called herself an angel sent from heaven to protect children from rapists. It was Sheila's failing mental health that became the basis on which her attorney tried to build a defense. He called his client a profoundly sick person and tried to prove that she was not aware of her actions. The reason for this was the mental and physical trauma she had suffered as a child. The defendant herself claimed that many years ago, when she was in that terrible accident and found herself in a coma on the verge of death, she met with God, and the latter told her to cleanse the world of men who infringe on children. Sheila's ex-husbands and some of Sheila's lovers also spoke in court who, in one voice, called her a crazy, unstable, and extremely violent woman. And Wayne Annis, the third husband, said that the ex-wife repeatedly persuaded him to kill Mr. Labar in order to seize his property. But despite the defense's attempts to convince the court that Sheila was insane and in need of treatment, it was proven that she was aware of her actions at the time of her crimes. She was found guilty in July 2008 and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of ever being released. All of her appeals were rejected. Sheila is now serving her sentence in Florida at Homestead Correctional Facility. With the development of information technology, comments have come into human life. Every minute, people all over the world express their opinions in different ways. Someone leaves a comment on a post or a photo. Others share their impressions of a movie or a book. Comments on different kinds of services are especially popular. You have probably encountered them or written them yourself. This mainly concerns the sphere of cosmetology, hairdressing, construction, trade, medicine, and so on. Thanks to the comments, it is easy to understand the specifics of the work, its quality. Another criminal story will surprise you in many ways. In it, senselessness borders on madness. However, you will be surprised even more when you learn that the customer of the crime left a positive feedback for the completed work on the internet. This reaction was a fatal mistake for him and shed light on the investigation. Finding: March 12, 2020, the outskirts of Nashville, Tennessee, USA. The bodies of 33-year-old Holly Williams and her ex-boyfriend, 36-year-old William Lanway, were found in a white 2005 Acura sedan. The unexpected find was discovered by a random passerby, a construction worker who was working nearby. The man contacted emergency services and told them what he had seen. When the emergency team arrived on the scene, it turned out that the couple had been shot. No one expected that the 3-year investigation would uncover a number of secrets and expose many vices. But most importantly, the criminals will be caught and severely punished, and their example will serve as a lesson for others. Holly Williams. Holly Ann Williams was born on January 14, 1987, in Nashville. Some friends characterized her as a modest and sweet girl. Others considered free-spirited and willful. Since childhood, the heroine of the story was interested in beautiful things and people. She was an aesthete and saw the beautiful in everything. Therefore, she dreamed of linking her future life with the beauty industry. It must be said that she succeeded in this. In the middle of 2017, Holly graduated from the Georgia Career Institute in Murfreesboro, and already in September of the same year she received a cosmetologist's license. She later opened her own business called Shine Aesthetics. Her business specialized in makeup, grooming procedures, and eyelash extensions. The girl herself was the face of her salon, beautiful, well-groomed, and personable. Her friend told me that she was really good at what she did. Holly had a lot of admirers, but she chose an eccentric guy named William Lanway. Their relationship was of an amplitude nature. William fell in love with her like a boy, beautifully courted. However, broad gestures of love alternated with jealousy and scandals. As it turned out later, William was a skilled manipulator who knew how to properly apologize and continue the emotional swing further. He resorted to standard techniques, asked for forgiveness, gave gifts and flowers, promised to change. The girl returned to the toxic relationship again and again. The very unstable behavior of the boyfriend could be explained by a difficult childhood and traumas received in the first marriage. However, this does not justify his actions in later life. Bill Lanway. William Lanway, better known as Bill, was born on March 17, 1983 in Clarksville, Montgomery County, Tennessee. The boy spent his first years in the love of his mother and the rest of his relatives. Later, however, a terrible tragedy occurred. At the age of 26, Candy Kay, William's mother, died. At that time, he was 3.5 years old. It is known that her husband, who stabbed his wife almost in front of his son, was responsible for the young woman's untimely departure. Before that, Lyle Lanway threatened to shoot himself and William if his mother did not return on time from the store. Perhaps the man had mental problems or was violently jealous of his wife and lost control of himself. Either way, this event left an indelible mark on Bill. Subsequently, his upbringing was taken up by the closest relatives. He grew up with proper care and protection. In 20 years, the young man married Dana Rucker. 3 years later, the spouses had a long-awaited daughter. Madison Kay did not know the misfortune that her father experienced. Parents loved the little girl, cherished and pampered. However, and this time, fate was merciless. The girl fell seriously ill. She was diagnosed with brain cancer. Unfortunately, the treatment was ineffective, and September 21, 2011, the baby became an angel. Chetta Lanway could not recover from grief. Gradually, the relationship between the spouses broke down, and they decided to divorce. For a long time, Billy was depressed, withdrawn. However, life went on further, and he needed to accept reality. In everyday life, the man behaved shyly, tried not to show his feelings. However, sometimes he had nervous breakdowns and outbursts of aggression. Billy found an outlet in the work of a mechanic. Friends remembered that pulled him out of a depressed state for a long time, and finally, his new girlfriend did. The vicissitudes of love. At one point, life smiled at Bill. He met Holly Williams. It is worth noting that the character of the man contributed to this. When he visited parties or bars, he became cheerful and sociable. Young people liked each other and quickly began to meet. Everything was good. The lovers spent a lot of time together. However, later their relationship lost its former ease. Bill repeatedly provoked quarrels and raised his hand against his girlfriend. When she realized that it was time to leave, Bill began to manipulate the situation with his daughter from his past. Because of this, the young woman did not leave him, tried to support him. But all patience comes to an end. Holly's desire to break the harmful passion even more provoked Bill. All controversial moments he solved with his fists. Holly was worried for her life. One day after another, conflict occurred. That was the last straw. When Williams returned from work, she found her favorite dog without signs of life. Until that moment, the health of the pet was not in doubt. Therefore, despite the fact that the boyfriend denied his involvement, she decided that it was his doing. Thus, he took revenge on her and threatened her for the future. After that, the young people finally parted. Nevertheless, Bill did not leave her alone, calling and stalking her. On one such day between them, there was another altercation which ended in a showdown in the police. Bill was arrested for aggravated assault as well as kidnapping. Holly got a restraining order against him. However, just a week later, the two were found dead. An accident or a double murder? To a random eyewitness who called the emergency services, it seemed that the car found was involved in a traffic accident. The vehicle was at a construction site in the southwest part of the city. It had apparently rolled onto the curb and hit a tree. The reporting party believed that the people inside were injured in the accident. However, that was not what actually happened. Police noted that the man and woman were in the back seat in an unnatural position. In addition, the couple had gunshot wounds. The marks that were found in the passenger compartment were uncharacteristic of a typical impact in a collision. Also, the victims had no identification or personal belongings on them. When the victims were identified, it came as a surprise to law enforcement officers that they were dealing with a couple that had recently been in police reports. Versions. The first theory put forward by detectives was a crime of passion. It was assumed that Bill killed Holly and then ended his life. However, soon, this version was excluded. When communicating with the close entourage of the couple, confirmed that in recent months, the relationship between them was really heated. Holly even installed reinforced locks and CCTV cameras in the house. When reviewing the footage, it was found that Bill had come to her house more than once, wandering around, looking for something. But what he was doing it for was unclear. However, such behavior spoke of the man's fixation and unwillingness to let go of the past. Later found witnesses who claimed that they saw the couple in the evening of March 11th calmly talking to each other. No aggression. At the same time, Bill was not noted. Perhaps their relationship was experiencing a new round, or they decided to keep friendly communication. In any case, the initial assumption of the investigators was dispelled. No murder weapon was found during the examination of the vehicle. If the man killed the woman and then committed suicide, where did the gun go? At the same time, the forensic results established that Bill could not have inflicted such wounds on himself, and every bullet fired was fatal. It looked like someone who knew how to handle firearms was at work. Things like cell phone, documents, and money were found in everyone's house, which means their trip wasn't a long or planned one. Holly and Bill may have been victims of kidnapping and murder. One thing is clear: they were murdered, then stuffed inside the car and then pushed off the side of the road. A third person wanted to stage the accident to cover up another crime, but he didn't do it properly, maybe in a hurry. At the same time, no evidence or fingerprints were found in the car. The investigation suggested another version of what happened was revenge. After the detectives talked to the relatives of the victims, it turned out that because of the fiery temper, Bill has not once got into trouble. It's possible that he had ill-wishers and enemies, and his behavior could have provoked someone to retaliate. But even that hardly explained the death of his ex-girlfriend. She was the complete opposite, calm and peaceful, but at the same time could have been an unwanted witness to something. Investigation. In search of the perpetrator, recent contacts of the victims were studied. The contents of mobile devices and laptops were analyzed. Curious information came to light. The same number was listed in the messengers of both. However, it was not possible to check it at once, which only heightened suspicions. Such numbers are usually used to conceal identity and are often associated with bad purposes. However, this method is not 100% secret, because it leaves a trace that can be detected by an experienced programmer. To identify the owner of the number, the authorities had to turn to the specialists of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. In parallel, there was a study of CCTV footage from Holly's house. It turned out that shortly before the tragic events, 3 unknown men broke into her home. All were thoroughly prepared, dressed in black clothes, faces hidden under a mask. It was unclear what they were looking for, as they did not take anything with them. It is worth noting that there were many valuable things in the woman's house. The intruders carefully examined the house, studied it. When they found one of the cameras, they tried to disconnect it. However, apparently they were not afraid of being caught and were confident in their impunity. After they left, Holly returned from work. She noticed the stranger's presence and became very frightened. She barricaded the doors overnight and changed the lock the next day. Poor thing was trying to protect herself. But from whom? And for what reason? Detectives had doubts about the woman's identity. Perhaps her fears were unfounded and she was being threatened. However, what could Holly be involved in? Detectives decided to delve into her line of work and discovered the following. Leila Love. The beauty parlor wasn't Holly's only source of income. No, she was not engaged in substance trafficking or smuggling. From the age of 18, the girl worked part-time as an escort. It was there that she earned a lot of money, as she served VIP clients, and personal business was used as a hobby, as well as a cover and concealment of income. In the intimate sphere, Holly was known as Leila Love and dealt only with wealthy men. Others couldn't afford her. Holly's duties included different services, escorting to events, massage, striptease, or passionate night. It must be said that she had quite a large client base. Her bright appearance attracted men, and they were ready to do anything for the time spent with her next to her. During this period, she earned a large sum and ensured a trouble-free life. At the same time, gained a lot of envious people, persecutors, and enemies. The fact is that the woman did not particularly hide her second profession. Of course, she did not shout about it at every turn, but her close friends, as well as Bill, knew about it. It turned out that at the beginning of the relationship, she honestly confessed everything to Lanway. Because of her large income, she did not want to stop working and considered it a mere formality. However, it wasn't. Her occupation could turn against her and attract dangerous clients. It was quite possible that the men who broke into her house were related to this. The CCTV images of the men were later released to the public, but due to the poor quality of the images, their release was not positive. First suspect. Clarification in the investigation came after the wanted subscriber was identified. He turned out to be a 30-year-old resident of North Carolina named Adam Carey. It turned out that the man is a former military man with special training, was convicted, currently working in a private security organization. In fact, he was a real mercenary and a killing machine. Remarkably, Adam's photo matched the man's face that Holly's camera captured. Detectives got into his background and found out that he's a pretty nasty character. He had previously served a 4-month sentence for impersonating a police officer. During the search in his apartment were found weapons, silencers, and telescopic sights, components of explosives, flashbang grenades. Curiously, he got off with a laughable sentence for possession of such a large amount of dangerous weapons, which means he had strong support and protection. It took investigators a lot of work to figure out the connection between Holly, her ex-boyfriend, and the mercenary. Since Adam was proficient in all kinds of weapons and fighting techniques, his job was to carry out serious assignments and guard dignitaries. After he came to the attention of the police, it was decided to bring the man in for questioning. For a long time, they could not get anything substantial out of him. Eventually, he was detained and given time to think about the situation. In the meantime, the investigators turned their attention to another figure who had surfaced as a result of examining the victim's contacts. There was someone else of interest among them. Lovers. Holly's hot fan turned out to be Eric Charles Mond, owner of Mond Toyota car dealership out of Austin, Texas. All in all, quite a famous person. For everyone around him, Mr. Mond was a model family man and father. In fact, he had weaknesses peculiar to many men, extramarital affairs on the side. The businessman often came to Nashville to visit his son, studying at a local college. At the same time, he was satisfying his secret desires. One day he met Holly, who impressed him with her appearance. They began to see each other periodically. On February 3, 2020, Eric, using an alias, contacted Holly by email. He said that he would soon be in town and hoped to meet him. A few days later, he again reminded me of himself. The next letter said, "Good morning, beautiful. I'm looking forward to today. I'm in Nashville. I'll meet you at the bar like last time. Text me when you get there." Apparently, the date went as arranged. However, on March 1st, he received several threatening messages. The unknown person blackmailed him that if he did not receive $25,000 for his silence, he would tell his wife about the secret connection, ruin his reputation and family. Naturally, this state of affairs did not suit the man, except he didn't realize who was really behind the correspondence. A private security agency. It is known that after that, Eric Charles Mond turned to his 47-year-old acquaintance, whose name was Gilad Peled. Gilad was consulting for a dealership to solve the parking lot homelessness problem and had a private security agency where, by a strange coincidence, the arrested Adam Carey worked. All that is known about the owner of the firm is that he organized his business after returning to Texas from Israel, where he had been living for some time. However, his company was not going through the best of times. The reason for this was the fact that the citizens of Texas have the ability to defend themselves independently and carry weapons. Despite this, there were still orders, but the security services were not very popular. Therefore, when Gilead was approached by Eric, the owner of the company was happy to get such a well-known and profitable client. A few weeks later, just after the murder of Holly and Bill, Eric left a positive comment on the site where private security companies are registered. At first glance, his comment contained nothing unusual. Eric praised the work done by Gilad's staff and was pleased with the result. There seemed to be a real breakthrough in the investigation. There was a connection between the murdered men, the suspect, and the wealthy businessman. The only thing left to do was to get Adam to talk and unravel this tangle of secrets. Mercenaries. The detectives warned Adam Carey that keeping quiet was useless. It would only get worse. Slowly, he began to talk and explained that Eric Mond had been outed to his boss. Eric complained of harassment and extortion, suspected his mistress, and asked him to look into it. For these purposes, Gilad Peled turned to Adam and his 46-year-old partner, Brian Brockway from Austin. The latter also happened to be an ex-military infantryman capable of performing combat missions. Initially, they were required to find out the sender of the messages and intimidate him. Adam reported everything to Gilad, as evidenced by the Discovered Progress report, which resembled mostly military reports. The surveillance revealed that the man who had threatened the customer was Bill Lanway. Holly had no idea what was going on behind her back. After the breakup, the former boyfriend was very angry and decided to set her up, and at the same time to get rich. He found out about the relationship between Holly and Eric Mond and started texting him under an assumed name. When the truth came out, the monitors reported everything to the management. However, their mission was soon adjusted. Among the instructions was to silence unwanted witnesses to the affair by any means necessary. Eric Mond was terrified because after it became clear that the extortionist is Bill Lanway, Bill again claimed to be the one. On March 11th, Eric's house received a phone call. If his wife picked up the phone, his secret would be revealed, and the most famous family in Austin would be ruined. Gilad proposed to the customer of his services to deal with the stalker and at the same time to deal with the girl according to the laws of Hollywood action movies. He agreed and offered $750,000 for the job. Holly and Bill's days were numbered. Order. On March 12th, 2020, Holly and her ex-boyfriend were seen leaving the house together. The couple then proceeded to the parking lot and got into a car. Apparently, they decided to drive somewhere for a while, as they did not bring any belongings with them. Since the young people were being followed, they were quickly intercepted by an armed Adam and Brian. Bill and Holly were kidnapped. Their vehicle was then moved to a construction site on Old Hickory Boulevard. They were shot at the site, after which they left their bodies in the car and dumped down an embankment. In the hours that followed, the mercenaries worked to remove evidence and connections to the crime. They also recovered the car they had rented for the monstrous mission. After the deed was done, the trio dispersed in different directions. The order was fulfilled, however. The mercenaries left a legacy. Eric Mond had set himself up and clearly rushed to a positive review. Arrests. After Adam Carey, Brian Brockway, and Gilad Peled were arrested, the detectives went on the sly. They wanted to catch the customer red-handed, so they asked one of them to contact him and make up a story. Gilad called Eric and said that one of his partners learned about what had happened
and demanded to enter the share. The head of the security agency offered to get rid of him, the same way he had done with Holly and Bill. Despite the fact that Eric Mond was very angry, he agreed to commit another massacre. He didn't care how many people died. The main thing for him was to keep the secret and feel safe. On December 10th, 2021, the famous businessman was detained. All four were charged with contract murder. Of all the accused, only Eric repented of what he had done. The rest of the mercenaries did not express the slightest regret. Before Gilad and Brian were arrested, they had been bugged. The men joked that the couple killed got off easy. During the interrogations, the customer tried to turn the tables on the perpetrators. Allegedly, they misunderstood the task, and he only wanted to get the extortionist out and scare. However, when the detectives presented evidence of his involvement in the crime, he confessed to everything and confirmed the criminal conspiracy. Justice. In November 2023, court hearings began and lasted 2 weeks. It was established that the Black Plot took place in early March 2020. Transactions between the defendants proved the withdrawals and transfers of money. On March 5th, Eric paid Gilad $15,000 as an advance payment. The manager of the security company was responsible for each employee's bank account. On March 9th, Holly and Bill were placed under surveillance. 3 days later, Mond wired another $150,000. This became a kind of signal to start the operation. After the order was completed, the participants in the crime received the balance. Cumulatively, in March 2023, $750,000 came from the famous car dealer. It took the jury 7 hours to reach a verdict. On November 17, Brian and Adam were found guilty of contract murder resulting in death, as well as conspiracy to commit kidnapping and kidnapping resulting in death. Held was also found guilty of the charges. Prior to trial, he entered into a plea agreement against his co-defendants. On November 30th of the same year, justice also caught up with Eric Mond. He was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder for hire, but not guilty of kidnapping resulting in death. All the defendants were sentenced to life in prison without parole. It is known that the businessman's defense team was going to appeal the remaining charge of the trial for which the conviction was handed down. After the hearing, the prosecutor's office said it was satisfied with the punishment the court had chosen. The detective who led the investigation said there was finally relief that the perpetrators had been caught, were able to stand trial and be fairly punished. However, that won't fill the void left for the victims' families. Their families did not deserve this tragedy, and Holly and Bill did not deserve to be killed, he said. Afterward. Unfortunately, this crime is proof of how unpredictable and tragic life can be. In fact, Holly was an innocent victim in the schemes of her ex-boyfriend and a conspiracy of dangerous people. Forbidden passion is punishable, and dirty money has a retroactive effect. As for Bill, despite his misdemeanor, he also did not deserve the punishment he received. Curiously, with his actions he framed not only his ex-girlfriend, but also himself. Every parent, in an attempt to protect and keep their child safe, tries to explain that trusting strangers can be dangerous. They emphasize that you shouldn't talk to strangers, follow them somewhere, and under no circumstances should you ever get into a stranger's car. Having these conversations is crucial, just like explaining the reasons behind these precautions and the potential consequences of ignoring them. The story of an American high school student named Abigail Hernandez serves as a powerful lesson, illustrating what can happen when you're careless and too trusting of a stranger who, at first glance, seems to offer a helping hand during a tough situation. All Abigail did was hope that a kind guy would give her a ride home, but instead, she ended up in the lair of a real monster. Abigail Hernandez, family and early life. Abigail, or simply Abby. Maria Hernandez was born on October 12, 1998, in Manchester, New Hampshire, along the banks of the Merrimack River. She was the youngest of 2 daughters born to Ruben and Xenia Hernandez, and grew up with her older sister Sarah, to whom she was very close. Abby's mom worked as a nurse at a local hospital, while her dad was a sales agent. Overall, the Hernandez family was strong, happy, and pretty well off. But when Abby was in middle school, her parents decided to separate. Not long after the divorce, her father remarried and started a new family, while the daughters from his first marriage continued to live with their mom. Reuben still supported his older children financially, but their relationship dwindled to little more than birthday and Christmas greetings. From a young age, Abby was an active, curious, and social child. She always had a ton of friends, and she constantly shifted between different hobbies and activities, eager to try everything and be everywhere. Abby played sports, was a talented artist, enjoyed photography, read a lot, and studied foreign languages, which she picked up effortlessly. Around the age of 12, Abby became a member of a local outdoor club, regularly going on camping trips, hiking, and falling in love with the mountains. She also became pretty skilled in wilderness survival, putting those lessons to good use on various adventures. It's not surprising, considering New Hampshire's natural beauty, with its forests, mountains, and rivers. It's a paradise for outdoor activities, hiking, and climbing. This is a state that attracts adventurers, thrill seekers, and nature lovers from all over the country. Abigail Hernandez's classmates described her as a brave, smart, friendly, and determined girl who could easily connect with people around her. She was the kind of person who could jump into a conversation about pretty much any topic, wasn't afraid of challenges, and always spread her optimism to everyone around her. Abby wasn't one to sit still. She was always on the go, constantly moving, and making big plans for her future. The summer of 2013 was packed with exciting events for Abigail. When she returned to school in September, she was full of stories about her summer vacation, where she'd been, what she'd seen, and all the things she'd managed to do. By this time, the 14-year-old had started a romantic relationship with a boy named Jimmy, who went to the same school and was a year older than her. Xenia, Abby's mom, knew about the relationship and didn't mind her daughter dating him. Vanished on her way home from school. In early October 2013, with fall break and her 15th birthday just around the corner, Abigail was busy planning a hiking trip with other members of her outdoor club. She'd even received a pair of brand new hiking boots as a gift, but they were a little tight, so she decided to break them in by wearing them to school. On October 9th, Abby went to school like any other day. After classes, she planned to take a stroll through a nearby park, but promised her mom she wouldn't be out too late. However, by around 5 p.m., when Abby still hadn't come home, Xenia decided to call her, only to find that Abby's phone was turned off. Worried but trying to stay calm, Xenia figured her daughter had probably met up with friends and maybe her phone had died. A couple of hours later, with no word from Abby and unable to reach her, Xenia started to panic. She began calling Abby's friends and teachers, trying to find out when she had left school and where she might have gone. The school informed her that Abby had left right after classes ended and had said goodbye to her friends at the bus stop, where they all got on the school bus. Abby, however, had chosen to walk home. None of Abby's friends had seen her since. She hadn't stopped by anyone's house, and she hadn't called anyone. Even Jimmy couldn't get in touch with her, despite them having plans to meet up later that day. Terrified, Xenia, along with her older daughter Sarah, didn't waste any time and headed straight to the police station to report Abby's disappearance. Since Abby was a minor, the search for her began immediately. Investigators discovered that the last signal from her cell phone was picked up about a mile from her home. Almost immediately, news about the missing high school student started spreading across social media. Flyers with Abby's photo, a description of the clothes she was wearing, and a contact number for any tips about her whereabouts were quickly printed and distributed. By the next morning, a story about the missing girl was aired during the 7 a.m. news, urging anyone with information to come forward. Hundreds of police officers, volunteers, and concerned citizens joined the search for the 14-year-old. They scoured local parks, empty lots, wooded areas, bodies of water, and abandoned buildings. Law enforcement explored various leads, searched for possible witnesses, and interviewed Abby's friends and family. But every effort turned up empty. The first suspect. Detectives investigating the case tried to find out if Abby had any enemies, grudges, or perhaps an overly persistent admirer. But everyone who knew Abby insisted that she was always the life of the party, a friendly, open, and kind-hearted girl who didn't have any adversaries. She never got into conflicts, and none of her friends had ever heard of anyone stalking or harassing her. One of the first people detectives interviewed was Abigail's boyfriend, Jimmy, who quickly became the prime suspect. They questioned him about whether there had been any disagreements or arguments between them, whether he had any reason to be upset with her, or if he might have had any motive to harm her. But Jimmy seemed stunned by the questions, baffled as to why he was under suspicion, and couldn't fathom how anyone could think he would want to hurt his girlfriend. Jimmy had a rock-solid alibi for the time Abby went missing, which was backed up not just by his family but also by his teachers and about a dozen friends. That day, his schedule was packed. School, sports practice, rehearsals for an upcoming performance with his school band, and his grandfather's birthday party, all of which he attended without missing a beat. Jimmy fully cooperated with the investigation, telling police everything he knew, but it didn't help move the case forward. It was as if Abby had vanished into thin air. Despite months of searching, there wasn't a single clue or even a hint about where to look next. Detectives understood that the chances of finding the teenager alive were dwindling, but Abby's family refused to give up hope. The mysterious letter and a surprising theory. About a month and a half after Abigail's disappearance, her mother found a strange letter from her missing daughter in the mailbox at their home. In the letter, Abby asked for forgiveness for what she had done, said that she was okay, healthy, and safe. She wrote that she loved her mom and Sarah but couldn't reveal where she was. At the end of the message, there was a cryptic and rather puzzling phrase, "Dreams come true." Handwriting analysis confirmed that the letter was indeed written by Abby, and it was dated to early November, which meant there was a high likelihood that the teenager was still alive. But where could she be, and why couldn't she explain the real reason for her disappearance? Was she scared, or had someone forced her to write that letter? Immediately, a theory emerged, suggesting that Abigail had voluntarily run away from home, but saw the news story about herself and decided to let her family know she was alive. There was speculation that Abby might have been pregnant and had run off with the baby's father, afraid of facing her family's anger and the judgment of others. However, the Hernandez family was outraged by this pregnancy and runaway theory. Sarah firmly stated that if her younger sister had been expecting a baby, she would have been the first to know, as they were always very close and had no secrets from each other. Besides, Abby's only boyfriend was Jimmy, and according to him, they hadn't even been intimate yet. They were both still virgins. Abby's friends backed this up, confirming that she hadn't dated anyone other than Jimmy, and had never mentioned having any other crushes or relationships. Her best friend Miranda was also adamant that Abby couldn't have been pregnant and would never have run away, causing so much pain to her mom and older sister. Plus, all of Abby's documents, personal savings, and valuable belongings were still at home. Investigators thoroughly examined and analyzed the letter, hoping to find any clues or hints about where to look for the girl. Unfortunately, there were no hidden messages or cries for help. Despite this, the FBI got involved in the case, classifying it as an abduction. They believed Abby was being held against her will, and that the letter had been written under strict orders, with no chance to reveal her location. It turned out to be an accurate assumption, as the kidnapper and his victim were just a few dozen miles away from the Hernandez home. What's even more disturbing is that police had visited the kidnapper's house multiple times since Abby's disappearance, but found nothing suspicious. Meanwhile, the man himself felt tracked and frantically thought about what to do with his captive. Who is Nathaniel Kibbe? Now it's time to introduce the kidnapper himself. Nathaniel, or just Nate. Kibbe was born on July 15, 1980, in the same town as Abby. There isn't much reliable information about his family, but some sources suggest that he was raised by his mom alone and never knew his biological father. In his school years, Nate was a real troublemaker, a bully, and that one kid everyone was scared of. He constantly got into fights and clashed with those around him, Even more unsettling, he kept a list of people he disliked, people he planned to beat up or harm in some way. From a young age, he displayed aggression and cruelty toward others, making his peers avoid him while teachers struggled to handle his behavior. As a teenager, young Kibby caught the attention of the police several times for different offenses. He was part of a gang, which he took great pride in, had a fascination with firearms, and knew a lot about them. He had multiple run-ins with the law for assault causing serious injuries, illegal possession of substances, and petty theft, but he always got off with just a slap on the wrist. Interestingly, Nate had attended the same high school as Abby, but since he was 18 years older than her, they never crossed paths, either in or outside of school. After finishing high school, it seemed like Nathaniel decided to turn his life around and leave his criminal activities behind. He got a job at a local business where, in general, his co-workers and management were generally positive about him. But a couple of years later, after a serious conflict, Nate quit, moved to the suburbs, and settled in a trailer park in a far from prosperous neighborhood. Neighbors thought he was strange and tried not to get involved with this irascible and aggressive guy. In 2011, Kibby, who by then was already in his 30s, met and actually cohabited with a young girl. She was from a dysfunctional family, ran away from home, and moved into the adult man's trailer. Remarkably, he didn't even try to hide their close relationship and introduced her as his girlfriend. He got away with all of this and was not punished in any way. In the spring of 2013, Nate attempted kidnapping for the first time, but he luckily failed. He attacked a 15-year-old schoolgirl right at a bus stop near the school and tried to force her into his car. However, she put up fierce resistance, began to break free and call for help. Passers-by ran to the screams, and the attacker promptly left the scene. Surprisingly, despite the testimony of the victim and witnesses, the case was quickly closed, and it never went to trial. For some reason, no one thought this guy could pose a real threat. A kind stranger. Now let's go back to the day Abigail disappeared, October 9th, 2013. As already mentioned, on the eve of her 15th birthday, the girl received a gift of hiking boots that were a little too tight for her. She decided to wear the shoes a little before hiking in the mountains and wore them to school. Toward the end of class, Hernandez realized her mistake, but didn't give up and walked home. It was getting harder and harder to walk, and each step was painful, but there was still a long way to go home. Suddenly, an old pickup truck, driven by Nathaniel, pulled up beside her. The smiling young man offered her a ride to wherever she wanted to go, but she refused. Nevertheless, the stranger did not give up and continued to roll slowly beside the potential future victim. Nate noticed that Abby was limping a bit and asked her what had happened. Abby sighed and admitted that her new boots were too tight and had given her a blister. Hearing this, the man simply swung open the passenger door and gestured for her to hop in. After hesitating for a moment, Hernandez accepted the offer. She assumed that this kind, smiling man couldn't possibly be dangerous, but she was terribly wrong. On the way, Kibby started making small talk, trying to put his victim at ease, and he did a pretty good job of it. Abby felt safe, answering his questions and even laughing at his jokes. At one point, the man mentioned that he needed to stop by a hardware store to pick up a few things for a repair job. As they pulled into a dark parking lot, Abigail grew visibly nervous. She told him that her house wasn't far from there and that she could walk the rest of the way. Catching the unsettling look in the driver's eyes, she tried to unbuckle her seatbelt and jump out of the car, but Nate had anticipated her move. In one swift motion, he grabbed her by the clothes with one hand and pulled a gun out of the glove compartment with the other. He pointed it directly at Abby's face and threatened to kill her if she tried to resist. The attacker then tied her hands and feet with zip ties and put a baseball cap on her head in a way that blocked her view, making sure she couldn't see where they were going. But soon, he noticed that Abby had shifted the cap to try to see the road. This infuriated him. He pulled out a stun gun and shocked her until she lost consciousness. Imprisoned by a deranged sadist. Abby woke up in a strange, cramped, and stifling space with no windows. To give you a clearer picture, it was actually a small shipping container owned by Nathaniel, hidden away in the trailer park, tucked behind some trees. Soon after, the kidnapper appeared with duct tape and a motorcycle helmet in his hands. He taped her mouth and eyes shut, put the helmet on her head, and after making sure she was completely immobilized and helpless, he tore off her clothes and assaulted her. From that moment on, he repeatedly forced himself on her, almost every day, turning his twisted fantasies into reality. Nate also used psychological abuse on his captive, threatening to hurt her family if she ever tried to escape or call for help. At the same time, he promised that he'd let her go if she behaved and didn't cause him any trouble. During the first few days of her captivity, Abigail was in a state of shock, practically saying goodbye to her life. But as time passed, she realized that her captor wasn't planning to kill her, at least not yet. She decided to try to connect with him emotionally and see if she could convince him to let her go. She told him that she didn't judge him, that everyone makes mistakes, and that she wouldn't go to the police if he just released her back to her family. However, Nate was unpredictable. The smallest thing or word could set him off, turning him into a monster. Sometimes he would show her a twisted kind of tenderness, but more often he was brutal, using all forms of emotional and physical abuse against her. The container where he kept Abby was well soundproofed, so no one outside could hear her screams. But after about a month, he started bringing her into his trailer, allowing her to take a shower and even watch TV with him. Through the news, they learned about the extensive search efforts for Abby. That's when Kibby got the idea to have her write a letter to her mother to convince her that Abby was okay and to try to stop the search operation. Abigail wrote several letters under her kidnapper's dictation, and each time she tried to leave a hint about where to find her. But Nate saw through it and punished her severely. Eventually, she followed his instructions to avoid provoking his anger further. The mystery of the name. About 6 months later, Nate started trusting his captive enough to let her help him with his counterfeit money operation. Sometimes he let her sleep in his trailer and even trusted her to cook meals, but he remained as brutal as ever, continuing to abuse Abby. He forced her to call him Master and kept his real name a secret. Gradually, the obedient captive managed to build some rapport with her captor, and he even agreed to bring her books and magazines. One day, on one of the pages, Abby saw the name Nathaniel Kibby, but she wasn't sure if that was really her kidnapper's name. So she decided to take a dangerous gamble. One day she simply called him by the name, waiting for any kind of reaction. But all he did was roll his eyes, sigh, and calmly ask how she had learned his name. Abigail admitted that she had seen it in one of the books. He smirked but said nothing. Help was closer than she knew. Since Abby spent most of her time in the soundproof container, she had no idea what was happening outside. She didn't know that at one point the police had been just a few feet away from her, but they were there for a completely unrelated reason. You see, Nate had once again broken the law, and in an attempt to avoid serious trouble, he decided to cooperate with law enforcement and confessed to illegally possessing a firearm. The police showed up with a search warrant, thoroughly inspecting his trailer, but they didn't even think to check the container. For some reason, no one considered taking a look inside. Thanks to his cooperation, Kibby only received a fine, and his weapon was confiscated. Astonishingly, after all the terrible things he'd done, he still didn't face any real consequences. It seemed luck was on his side, and he probably felt invincible. He had no intention of letting Abby go, but maybe she had become just another part of his routine. A new girlfriend and a miracle escape. In July 2014, Nathaniel met a woman named Lorraine at a bar. After a brief conversation, he took her back to his trailer where they became intimate. Later, Lorraine started complaining about her financial struggles, mentioning that she didn't even have enough money to pay her rent. As she was leaving, Nate handed her two $50 bills, and she left. The next day, a furious Lorraine called Kibby, telling him that the money he'd given her was fake. She screamed that she'd already informed the police about where she got the counterfeit bills and warned him that law enforcement would be showing up with another search warrant soon. What she didn't realize was that her call would change the life of the missing high school girl forever. On July 20th, The kidnapper unexpectedly gave Abby all her personal belongings, tied her hands, sat her in the passenger seat of his car, and covered her face with a baseball cap. Abby had no idea what was happening and feared that he was finally going to kill her. But then Nate stopped on a deserted country road, freed Abby, and simply told her, "Get out, and don't you dare go to the police." After she stepped out of the car, he floored the gas pedal and sped off. Abby couldn't believe what was happening. She walked along the road in a daze until she saw a sign and realized that home wasn't far away. It took her a couple of hours to make the journey. In later interviews, she recalled constantly looking over her shoulder, afraid that her kidnapper might come back, but he was nowhere to be seen. Coming home. The Hernandez family had a surveillance camera at their front door that captured the moment Abby walked in. Abby heard her mom talking to someone on the phone and called out loudly to her. In shock, her mother dropped the phone and ran to the door. They hugged each other tightly, crying for a long time, unable to believe that the nightmare was finally over and they were together again. Abby noticed how much her mother's appearance had changed. She looked older and worn out from the months of worry. Xenia immediately started asking her daughter where she had been all this time and what had happened, suggesting they go straight to the police. But remembering her captor's threats, Abby decided not to turn him in and lied, saying she didn't know who had taken her or where she had been held. Even at the police station, she refused to reveal his name, afraid that Nate would come after her and her family. Over the next week, Abby wrestled with her thoughts, not sure what to do. Eventually, she decided to tell her mom the truth. Xenia convinced her to go back to the police, arguing that the man who did this needed to be brought to justice. Besides, neither Abby nor her family could truly feel safe while Kibby was still out there. Arrest, trial, and sentencing. On July 27, 2014, Abigail finally gave the police her kidnapper's name, along with the make and license plate of his car. Nate Kibby was arrested the very next day, and to everyone's surprise, he didn't put up any resistance, even though he completely denied being guilty. However, when authorities searched his trailer and the container, which they finally checked, they found overwhelming evidence proving that Abby had been held there for months, enduring abuse and suffering. Investigators discovered her hair, blood, sweat, and even broken fingernails. Despite the fact that Nate's guilt was beyond doubt, his lawyer filed a motion in August to have him released on bail. Shockingly, the judge approved this request, causing public outrage and disbelief. But on the same day, an order was issued prohibiting Kibby from approaching or contacting any members of the Hernandez family. The trial against Nathaniel Kibby began in December 2014 and continued until May 2016. In an attempt to get a lighter sentence, the defendant agreed to a plea deal and admitted his guilt. For his crimes, he was sentenced to 90 years in prison, with the possibility of parole no sooner than after 45 years. Abigail spoke in court, saying that she forgave her captor and added that because of him, she learned to appreciate her life and every moment spent with her loved ones even more. Her mother also took the stand, stating that while she hated Kibby with all her heart, she was still grateful that he had spared her daughter's life and allowed her to come home. The dark secrets of a rich and happy family. It's often said that great wealth can corrupt even the best of people, but in reality, that's not entirely accurate. Wealth simply amplifies the existing negative qualities in a person, providing a sense of impunity and permissiveness. While the absence of money is certainly not pleasant, it's important to remember that banknotes, jewels, and figures on bank accounts, by themselves, cannot bring happiness, especially if they were obtained through dishonest means or at the expense of someone else's life. The case of Suretta and Leon Brits in 2020 shook not just South Africa, where this dramatic story unfolded, but also the entire world. The investigation promised to be challenging, with an innocent individual initially becoming the main suspect. It wasn't until an unexpected and heartfelt confession emerged that the true perpetrator, who had the least malice towards the victim, was identified. Now, let's delve into the complicated scheme from the beginning, where money became a stumbling block in what many considered to be a large, harmonious family. The Brits family. The Brits, a family of European immigrants, settled in the early 1970s in the small but cozy town of Pofadder, located in the Northern Cape province of South Africa. Despite its modest size, this town is an important economic and tourist hub in the region known as Bushmanland. It's also worth noting that the surrounding landscapes are incredibly picturesque, attracting biologists and researchers with their diverse flora and fauna. In 1976, the Brits had their first son, whom they named Toki, and in 1979, their second son, Leon, was born. Even by local standards, the family was considered quite affluent. The family patriarch owned what was arguably the only major hotel in the area, which eventually grew into a comprehensive hotel and restaurant complex. Both brothers excelled in school, were active in sports, and thanks to their parents' efforts, received prestigious educations. After completing his studies, Toki left his hometown, while Leon, who had been helping his parents and learning the intricacies of the hotel business from his teenage years, decided to stay to eventually take over the reins of management. He was intelligent, attentive to detail, and possessed a so-called entrepreneurial vein, enabling him to manage affairs effectively. The story of Cinderella. At the hotel complex owned by the Brits family, various events, parties, and celebrations were often held. At one such event, Leon noticed a young beauty among the guests. A slender brunette with green eyes and a captivating smile caught his eye immediately. The young man decided to approach her and introduce himself, only to find out that she was just 14 years old and she was in school, though she appeared much older. This fact deeply unsettled Leon, who was already 25 at the time, but he still decided to invite the beauty for a dance, and afterward, they spent about an hour chatting while sitting on the terrace. The schoolgirl's name was Suretta, and from that very first meeting, Brits couldn't stop thinking about her, constantly dreaming of their next encounter. But let's delve a bit into who this enchanting young stranger was. Suretta Kerr was born on September 6, 1990, the youngest of 3 children in a family of immigrants from Eastern Europe. Her family lived in poverty, and her parents had been teetering on the brink of divorce for many years, exacerbating the already difficult situation. When the youngest daughter was only 9 years old, the head of the family tragically died from a venomous snake bite, leaving the mother alone with 3 children, barely making ends meet. All the Kerr children had to work to survive, making Suretta's childhood a difficult period filled with hardships and deprivation. But then, a wealthy suitor suddenly appeared in her life, ready to lay the world at her feet. Due to her young age, the girl didn't understand how to react to the attention from an adult man who was 11 years older than her. Leon seemed genuinely in love. He sought any excuse to meet with the girl, picked her up after school, took her to popular restaurants, bought expensive gifts, fashionable clothes, and tried to please her in every way possible. Suretta received things she had always been deprived of, and luxury literally went to the schoolgirl's head. She understood that with this man, she could build a family, and neither they nor their children would ever want for anything. The girl's mother, despite her daughter's young age, approved of the relationship. Leon seemed to her a reliable, decent, and kind person, and no one doubted the sincerity of his feelings. However, the young man's parents were very worried about his romance with her, as such relationships, if they went too far, could be considered a criminal offense. But the young man insisted he was willing to wait until his beloved turned 18, after which he would officially marry her. Unexpected pregnancy. About a year into their relationship, 15-year-old Suretta realized she was pregnant. She was hesitant to tell anyone, knowing that the news would not please either her mother or her lover. The girl began to wear baggy clothes to hide her changed figure and became withdrawn and uncommunicative, but she could no longer keep everything secret and decided to confess everything to her partner. The news of the impending addition was a shock to Leon. He understood that she could not only tarnish his reputation, but also lead to serious legal problems. The closeness between them had been initiated by him, and now he could be accused of seducing a teenager, which he couldn't allow. First, the man paid for a visit to a private clinic, where they not only confirmed the pregnancy, but also discovered that she was expecting twins. With the term approaching a critical point, Leon found a doctor at the same private clinic who agreed to terminate the pregnancy anonymously. Suretta was devastated and felt completely crushed, as her partner, who had promised to love and protect her, forcibly persuaded her to terminate their unborn children. However, Leon, being older, was able to pressure her and convince her of the necessity of the procedure. He promised that in the future, when they got married, they would definitely have children, but for now, it would simply destroy their lives and plans for a happy future together. The young woman had no choice but to comply, and she did as her boyfriend asked. She suffered from pain for several days after, but the physical discomfort was overshadowed by a sense of guilt and overwhelming depression. Suretta stayed in her room, cried constantly, and didn't know how to continue living with this. Her mother didn't show much interest in her condition, assuming her daughter was just upset over some argument with her boyfriend. But everything would pass once they reconciled. A couple of days later, Leon actually showed up at his beloved's doorstep and took her to the city to distract her, to walk in the park, and to browse through stores. He believed this would help her recover faster and lift her spirits. Sure enough, she soon managed to return to her previous life, but the feelings of resentment and distrust towards her partner lingered. Forced marriage. 3 years later, while the young woman was in her senior year of high school, she discovered she was pregnant again. At that time, she was only a few months away from becoming an adult, and this unexpected, delicate condition was not supposed to cause any particular issues. However, when she told Leon about it, he reacted very negatively again and insisted that his beloved terminate the pregnancy, arguing that they were too young to start a family. This time, Suretta firmly refused, stating that she would not do it and would keep the child, even if it meant raising it on her own. After some thought, Leon eventually made an official proposal, presenting her with a beautiful diamond ring. By then, their once tender feelings had considerably dulled, but this renewed promise and Suretta's ongoing pregnancy left him with no choice. By the time she graduated from high school, the changes in her figure were already obvious, and in the fall, as soon as she turned 18, the couple had a lavish wedding. The newlyweds appeared quite happy, but each had certain doubts about the correctness of their decision. A few months later, the couple had their first son, and 2 years after that, twin boys were born. The family lived in affluence, able to indulge in anything they wanted, and from the outside they looked successful, well-off, and happy. Family business. The business founded and developed over many years by Leon's parents was quite profitable. Over time, the man also started his own chain of stores and fast food eateries, and his ventures were on the rise, with the family business flourishing. However, from the mid-2010s, the family began to experience troubles and misfortunes. In 2014, Leon's father passed away suddenly due to long-standing heart issues, and his mother's health deteriorated from the shock of losing her husband. She soon showed rapidly progressing signs of dementia, forcing her sons to place her in a specialized clinic for necessary care and proper attention. Toki returned to his hometown after many years away to help his brother manage the business, and together they took over the operation of a hotel. At the same time, Leon decided to involve his wife in the family business, something she had long aspired to do. It was decided to register a mining equipment and tools store in her name. She dove into work while also continuing to raise their 3 young sons. Life between 2 cities. Brits, the eldest son, started elementary school in his hometown of Pofadder, but as the twins grew older, the parents faced the pressing issue of choosing a suitable educational institution for all their children. The challenge was that finding quality education in South Africa was not so straightforward. The spouses found a good school in the nearby city of Kakamas. The school was about 75 miles from Brits's home, but there was no need for daily travel back and forth. The couple decided to rent a spacious house in Kakamas, where Suretta moved with the sons, but Leon stayed in Pofadder as he could not leave the business and manage affairs remotely. However, the wife had to step back from managing the store, although she really enjoyed it, and was quite successful at it. The woman dedicated herself entirely to raising the sons, and they only visited home to see their husband and father on weekends and holidays. Leon himself rarely came to Kakamas due to his busy schedule. Initially, it seemed that everything was in order, but over time, the spouses drifted further apart, and their feelings significantly cooled. Battle with a deadly illness. In 2018, Suretta started having health problems, which she did not take seriously at first. However, an examination revealed that the young woman had oncology and problems with the cardiovascular system. Soon, she underwent surgery to remove the malignant tumor and was prescribed a treatment course. Fortunately, all procedures were timely, saving the life of the mother of 3. But from then on, for prevention, she needed periodic therapy at a clinic in Johannesburg, which was quite expensive. The Brits family had the means, and Leon would never skimp on the health of his son's mother. Additionally, Suretta hired a nanny and a housekeeper who helped her around the house and looked after the children, which was essential when the woman went for treatment. By that time, the spouses had drifted so far apart that each essentially lived their own life. The young woman started an affair in Johannesburg, so when going for another course of preventive therapy, she would not stay in a hotel, but at her lover's place. Leon, apparently, also periodically had women, as compromising photos and messages found in his phone suggested. In fact, nothing but their 3 children bound the couple together anymore. Enemies and envy. The family issues did not affect the business, which continued to thrive. The hotel, stores, and restaurant chain were generating impressive profits, some of which Leon invested in real estate in major cities, earning a good income from rentals. Undoubtedly, their family was not only the wealthiest in Pofadder, but also among the most affluent in the northern Cape Province. Naturally, the Brits had many enviers and ill-wishers, whose numbers grew in proportion to the profitability of their business. Leon, his parents, and his brother regularly received threats and various demands. Leon himself often confided in his wife that he had long felt unsafe and feared that someone might try to take away his life's work. In each of Leon's offices, as well as at his and his parents' homes, there were safes and cleverly disguised hiding places storing cash in various currencies, securities, diamonds, jewelry, and gold bars. Suretta knew only about some of them, specifically those in their own home in Pofadder. Initially, the threats were a serious concern, but over time, as the man began receiving them daily, he simply stopped paying attention to them. He believed they were just attempts to intimidate him, as the ill-wishers had never tried to act on their threats. However, a tragedy soon occurred that ended Leon's life. Body in the pool. On October 7, 2020, Leon's wife called him and asked him to check on their dogs, which, according to a neighbor, had gotten out. Leon promised to call back as soon as he arrived and checked that everything was in order, but the return call never came. Concerned, Suretta called her husband's number several times, but no one answered. Leaving the children with the nanny, she drove to Pofadder. The front door was unlocked, but it seemed that no one was home. It was suspiciously quiet inside, and no one responded to her calls. She then went to the backyard, where she found her husband's body floating face down in the pool. There were wounds on his back, the water was tinged pink with blood, and it was clear that he was deceased. Panicking, Suretta called the police, the emergency services, and then dialed Toki, informing him of the incident. When law enforcement arrived, they immediately cordoned off the house as a crime scene. It was evident that the businessman's death was violent. The body had several stab wounds and signs of a struggle, and a safe in the house had been opened and its contents taken. An initial theory was that burglars had broken into the house, and the homeowner, returning unexpectedly, had caught them off guard, paying with his life. However, many other valuable items in plain sight remained untouched, suggesting the burglars had specifically targeted what was in the safe. Prime suspect. The murder of the successful and wealthy businessman quickly made a lot of noise, hotly discussed in the media and on social networks, generating numerous rumors, gossip, and speculations. Many knew about the long-standing threats against Brits, and believed that competitors or ill-wishers had fulfilled their threats. However, the first and key suspect in the case became Toki, who had been managing the family business with his brother for the last few years. First, he had visited Leon shortly before the tragedy and was considered the last person to see him alive. Second, their mother was in very poor health, with doctors giving her only a few months to live, and her will, reportedly, was stored at the younger son's house. The prevailing theory was that the elder brother disagreed with the business mostly going to Leon and wanted to access the will to alter it. This explained why the other items in the house remained untouched. It was also suspected that he did not act alone, and murder was not part of the original plan. Toki categorically denied any involvement and stated that under no circumstances would he harm his own brother, especially since they had never had disputes or disagreements over financial matters. He sought support from Suretta, who asserted that she believed him and would help find the best lawyer to prove his innocence. Unexpected confession. For nearly 2 months, the investigation was at a standstill with no new evidence, leads, or witnesses emerging. However, one day, 35-year-old Jacques Van Vuren walked into the police station and offered to make a deal by pleading guilty and revealing all his accomplices in exchange for a reduced sentence. It turned out that Jacques had once attended the same school as Suretta. They were friends, and he even had feelings for her, but she did not reciprocate and soon started a relationship with Léon. The former friends had not seen each other for many years, but one day they coincidentally met at a shopping center and started talking. At that time, Jacques was going through a tough period. He had divorced his wife, lost his job, developed a dependence on alcohol, and was in dire need of money. Suretta saw that her former admirer still harbored tender feelings for her, so she began to confide in him about her unhappy marriage. She claimed that her husband mistreated her, was abusive, but she could not leave him because he threatened to take their sons and leave her with nothing. This topic was painful for Van Vuren since his ex-wife had barred him from seeing their children after the divorce, and he genuinely empathized with Suretta and wanted to help. They exchanged phone numbers, and a few days later, Suretta, having devised a cunning plan, called her former friend and tearfully told him that her husband had beaten her. She said she couldn't leave him, and the only solution was to eliminate the tyrant. Suretta was very persuasive, and Jacques believed her. Moreover, she promised him 500,000 South African rand as payment, and he, as mentioned, was in desperate need of money. Jacques agreed to help Suretta, but he did not want to do the dirty work himself, so he decided to hire other people. The plan was developed in early 2020, but due to the global epidemic that swept the world, its execution had to be delayed. During this difficult time, the Brits' family business suffered colossal losses. A store and part of the restaurants had to be closed, and Leon wanted to sell the hotel, which his wife did not agree with. In late September, the conspirators returned to the original plan, but Jacques requested half of the payment up front. However, due to financial difficulties, Suretta could only withdraw 100,000 rand and also gave her accomplice her engagement ring. With this money, Jacques hired a friend named Enrique Williams, who had drug issues and was willing to commit murder for money. However, Williams was afraid he couldn't handle a grown, strong man alone, so he brought along his 25-year-old friend, Amantla Bareki, to share the fee. Suretta gave the criminals access to the house, informed them about the safe's location, and allowed them to take whatever they liked to make the robbery look more plausible. The only condition was that the dogs should not be harmed, so she let them out in advance. The neighbors saw this and called her, signaling that Williams and Bareki were in the house, after which she called her husband and lured him into a deadly trap. When the unsuspecting man entered the house, he was struck on the head with a baseball bat by one of the lurking criminals, and another attacked him with a knife, leaving him no chance. Leon was stabbed 8 times and hit with the bat a dozen times before his lifeless body was thrown into the pool. After opening the safe, the criminals found no money, only securities, diamonds, and gold bars. They handed over the loot to Jacques, who, in turn, gave everything to Suretta. The criminals decided not to take anything else from the house, Fearing they would leave too many traces, they were only counting on the large sum promised by the client. Torment of conscience and fear of inevitable punishment. Jacques was not supposed to appear at the crime scene himself. Suretta feared he would be caught on surveillance camera footage and recognized, as Toki had seen him a couple of times and knew he was his brother's wife's school friend. He was only supposed to pass on the advance payment and instructions to the accomplices. However, Jacques was anxious to ensure everything went smoothly and drove past the Brits' house several times to make sure the perpetrators were in place and the victim had arrived directly to them. His car was captured on camera, and although the license plate was not clearly visible, the police were interested in the vehicle, meaning that finding its owner was only a matter of time. Furthermore, there was no money in the safe, and all the family's accounts were frozen during the investigation. Suretta had no way to pay the hired perpetrators, as selling diamonds, bars, or securities would expose her. She asked them to wait, but Williams and Barecki were not willing to wait and began to threaten Jacques. Desperate, Jacques had not received the money, was plagued by guilt, and his accomplices threatened to deal with him. He realized that he would end up either behind bars or follow Léon. Jacques shared his concerns with his sister, who told their mother, and together the women convinced him to voluntarily surrender to the police and reveal the other participants in the plot to secure a more lenient punishment. True motives of the mastermind. Jacques, in his full account to the police, believed he had done a noble act, as he saw Léon as a man who mistreated his wife, was abusive, and threatened to take away the children. However, it was actually Suretta who initially directed the police to consider Toki as the main suspect. Citing a will and property disputes between the brothers, the authorities decided to detain and interrogate the woman to uncover her true motives. It turned out that she and her husband had fallen out of love long ago, and each was living a separate life. Suretta had a lover in Johannesburg, whom she wanted to join permanently. However, when she expressed her desire to divorce, Léon categorically refused to agree. He also threatened to leave her with nothing and take the sons if she decided to leave him. It's hard to say what motivated Léon, but it's likely he still had feelings for his beautiful wife and hoped to mend their relationship. Suretta, however, decided that she would inherit his money and business upon his death, which would allow her and her lover to live comfortably. She also saw an opportunity to rid herself of Toki by framing him, thus becoming the sole owner of the hotel, stores, and restaurants after her mother-in-law's death. Her plan might have succeeded if there had been money in the safe and she had managed to pay off the hired perpetrators. Trial and sentencing of all participants. The trial of the criminal quartet took place in the spring of 2021. Each participant's role in this high-profile case was considered. Jacques Van Vuren, who made a deal with the prosecution, told everything in detail and turned in his accomplices, was sentenced to 20 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 5 years. The hired perpetrators, Enrique Williams and Amantal Barecki, were found guilty of premeditated murder with special cruelty and robbery. They were sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. As for the widow who orchestrated the murder of her own husband, she managed to convince the court that she had been a victim from the very beginning of their relationship. She testified that Léon coerced her into intimacy when she was just 14 years old, and a year later, when she became pregnant, Brits, to avoid responsibility, forced her to terminate the pregnancy at a fairly late stage. In recent years, despite the disappearance of Love, he refused to divorce her and threatened to take the children. Nevertheless, Suretta Brits was sentenced to 25 years in prison, with the possibility of parole from the beginning of her term. The court considered her remorse and heartfelt confession, as well as her status as the mother of 3 minor children. However, 3 years after the sentence was passed, she remains incarcerated.
The Lissi family tragedy. What drove a devoted family man to the brink? How can one identify a psychopath? Let's delve into what this term encompasses. Psychopathy is a personality disorder marked by distinctive traits such as a lack of empathy and compassion, emotional shallowness, egocentrism, and a deceitful charm. While not an exhaustive list, These qualities are commonly observed in psychopaths. Such individuals are adept at adapting, skillfully manipulating those around them, and expertly concealing their true nature, often to the extent that even those closest to them may not recognize the potential danger. The Lissi family's story serves as a chilling reminder that someone perceived as a loving and close family member can suddenly morph into a remorseless perpetrator, sparing not even their own children. The man's behavior and his stated motives for committing such a heinous act were so alarming and shocking that they raised questions about his sanity. Yet, to everyone's astonishment, a psychiatric evaluation revealed that he was fully aware of his actions and had premeditated the horrific crime. This case shook Italy to its core, particularly the serene province of Mata Visconti, where this tragedy unfolded, marking it as the most notorious crime in the small Milanese suburb's history. Now let's methodically unravel this story and attempt to trace the sequence of events that led to such a tragic conclusion, the tragedy in Mata Visconti. In the early hours of Saturday, June 14, 2014, the quiet town of Mata Visconti was awakened by the desperate cries of a man. Peering out their windows, residents saw their neighbor, 31-year-old Carlo Lissi, calling for help. He appeared frightened and disoriented, mumbling incoherently and pleading for someone to call the police. As people from nearby homes gathered, Carlo revealed that his entire family had been victimized by intruders who had broken into their home, while he had miraculously survived because he was out with friends at a local sports bar, watching the soccer match between Italy and England. He mentioned that everything seemed normal when he left his house earlier that night, but upon returning, he found his home in disarray and the lifeless bodies of his 38-year-old wife, Christina, their 5-year-old daughter, and their 1.5-year-old son. Neighbors immediately called the police and emergency medical services. While waiting for them to arrive, the operator asked Carlo to check if any of his family members had a pulse and to possibly start CPR if there were any signs of life. To this, he screamed that he wouldn't step inside his house again or touch the bodies. While his behavior could be attributed to shock, it was peculiar that he referred to his family members as bodies even before confirming their demise. Carlo's odd behavior didn't stop there. When police and medical personnel arrived and confirmed the deaths of his wife and children, he barely reacted. He attempted to cry, but only managed contorted facial expressions, with his eyes remaining dry and his face almost indifferent. He struggled to recall the sequence of his actions, gave conflicting statements, but claimed to have recorded the moment he discovered the bodies on his phone's camera. He believed the recording would prove his innocence, but it turned out to be one of the main pieces of evidence against him, among many others. This was the beginning of a high-profile case that was quickly solved. The robbery narrative, strongly advocated by Lissi, was dismissed within hours of the investigation, and he became the prime suspect. As the police uncovered more physical evidence at the scene of the crime and interacted further with Carlo, doubts about his mental health began to emerge. Who was Christina Lissi? Let's start this narrative by introducing its main characters. Christina Lissi, born Christina Omas, came into the world on September 17, 1975, in the small northern Italian town of Pavia, becoming the eldest child in her family. From a young age, she exhibited a strong-willed, independent, and highly ambitious nature, always marching to the beat of her own drum. She possessed leadership qualities and was constantly striving to excel in whatever she undertook, whether it was her schoolwork, performances in the drama club, or any day-to-day activities. Christina was someone who always had a wide circle of friends, thanks to her excellent organizational skills and the ability to lead. After finishing high school, she was accepted into a prestigious university in Milan and soon moved out of her parents' home to start an independent life. Despite this, she maintained a close relationship with her family, staying in constant touch, and her parents knew they could always rely on their eldest daughter. At the age of 19, while still attending university, Christina took a job at a branch of a major Italian insurance company located in Mata Visconti. She quickly earned the respect of her superiors and colleagues, and her career was on a fast track to success. Upon graduation, she had a wide array of opportunities before her, but instead of moving to a big city, Olmos chose to stay closer to home in the countryside. By this time, she had already received a promotion at work and assumed a managerial position, becoming a leading specialist in the field of civil insurance. However, even as she grew into an adult and a successful woman, Christina never gave up her youthful passion for theater. She dedicated all her spare time to rehearsals and performing on stage, particularly enjoying musical productions due to her strong voice and impeccable musical ear. In Mata Visconti, she had her admirers and was sometimes even recognized on the streets. Yet Christina's personal life didn't seem to fall into place as smoothly. She had many suitors and occasional romances, but most of the men she encountered seemed frivolous, unreliable, and unsuitable for a serious relationship or family life. She held on to the belief that she would eventually find her true love and achieve happiness. Carlo Lissi, the unassuming psychopath. Carlo Lissi entered the world in the fall of 1982 in the Italian commune of Casarano as the eldest of two sons in his family. The family patriarch held conservative views, was quite strict, and even harsh with his children. Carlo's younger brother quickly became the parents' darling, constantly pampered and protected, while they demanded unquestioning obedience, stellar academic performance, and high achievements from their firstborn. From childhood, Carlo strived to meet his parents' expectations, always acting as instructed. He excelled academically, participated in volleyball, a sport his father chose for him despite Carlo's passion for soccer, and never argued with his father, who often stated that his house operated solely on his rules. It was easy to upset or anger their father, who became terrifying when enraged, so Carlo made it a point never to contradict him, always enviously observing his father's and mother's more affectionate treatment towards his younger brother. As a teenager, Carlo became nervous and withdrawn, dreaming of doing something on his own, yet fearing his father's wrath. His fears, internal struggles, and self-doubt affected his relationships with peers. Carlo had almost no friends at school, where he was seen as an uninteresting nerd, often openly bullied without the ability to defend himself, as his father had crushed his self-esteem and suppressed any desire to assert himself. Over time, Carlo learned to adapt and blend in. He avoided conflicts, tried to merge with the crowd, and was superficially polite and kind, even to those he despised. It seemed Carlo had lost his own emotions, or perhaps never had them, laughing or mourning with others, but his emotional responses always remained shallow because he never truly felt those emotions. Another trait of Carlo was his skill in dodging uncomfortable questions. He wasn't a pathological liar, but knew how to prevaricate and evade with such an impassive demeanor that it seemed he was speaking the truth. People who knew Carlo personally later recalled his diminished capacity for empathy. He could be described as callous and indifferent to the troubles and sorrows of others, including those close to him. After finishing school, Lissi enrolled in a prestigious university's economics faculty, chosen by his father, despite Carlo's disinterest in economics or working with numbers. But his opinion was never sought, and he couldn't challenge his father's decision. Thus, Carlo was accustomed to acting against his own interests just to meet others' expectations. Carlo was quite handsome and knew how to use it to his advantage. His youthful sports activities and regular gym visits in adulthood made him even more attractive. Coupled with some charm and superficial charisma, Carlo could be described as a real looker with a dazzling smile and athletic build. People often admired his looks, leading to excessive self-love and clinical narcissism. Lissi easily initiated flings with women, but was incapable of engaging in serious, long-term relationships. First, he tried to avoid any responsibility. Second, he had no interest in making long-term plans, simply going with the flow. And third, his partners soon realized he was emotionally shallow and devoid of real attachment, leading them often to initiate the breakup. Even after university, the young man continued living with his parents, showing no desire to start an independent life, let alone a family of his own. Meanwhile, he secured a job at a leading IT company in Milan.
Carlo earned a good salary and faced broad prospects, but remained dissatisfied with his career. However, his parents were overjoyed, and his father seemed proud of his eldest son for the first time, so Carlo was too afraid to disappoint him, preferring to avoid conflicts and criticism. But soon, a good job and career achievements weren't enough. His parents increasingly pressured him to marry and provide them with grandchildren. Aware of his numerous fleeting affairs and his inability to maintain serious relationships, these discussions often led to arguments at home. As Carlo always tried to avoid confrontations, he assured them he would soon find a wife and start a family. Carlo and Christina Lissi, a love story. Carlo first laid eyes on Christina during her performance in a musical play on stage, where he was utterly captivated by her powerful charisma and stunning vocal talent. Despite his immediate fascination, he lacked the courage to approach her after the show. However, fate intervened a few weeks later when mutual friends introduced them. At the time of their meeting, Carlo was only 23, while Christina had already turned 30. Despite the significant age difference, they quickly developed a romantic relationship. Christina, who had previously focused mainly on her career, found herself unexpectedly wanting to build a family and have children with Carlo. He was handsome, career-oriented, and intelligent. Christina perceived his hesitancy, dependency, noticeable selfishness, and some emotional coldness as traits that could be mended. She took the initiative in their relationship, with Carlo compliantly following her lead. Just a few months into the relationship, Omas introduced Carlo to her family. Christina's parents, however, were not pleased with her choice. They saw her suitor as frivolous, with Christina's mother describing him as a child in a man's body. She believed her daughter needed a more emotionally mature partner who could be a reliable support, not this immature young man. Christina, however, disagreed and decided to follow her heart, as she always had. Conversely, Carlo's parents were thrilled with his choice. Christina was seen as an adult, wise, self-sufficient, and accomplished woman who could take care of herself and their indecisive, somewhat irresponsible son. The head of the family, who was not easily pleased, was particularly delighted, convincing Carlo further that he had made the right decision. In quiet waters. About a year after meeting, the young couple moved in together and started actively planning their wedding. Carlo was quiet and compliant, always listening to his fiancée, never contradicting her, and carefully avoiding domestic disputes. Christina made all the decisions while her chosen partner silently supported them. This arrangement suited her perfectly. She was confident that a long and happy life awaited them. However, just before their wedding, Carlo revealed his true nature for the first time, nearly causing them to split. Before the wedding, Carlo's friends threw him a bachelor party in one of Milan's popular nightclubs. They drank, had fun, and were having a great time when a group of women joined them. One of them showed a keen interest in the groom-to-be, trying her best to seduce him. His inebriated friends immediately egged him on, suggesting that a fleeting affair with the stranger would be the perfect adventure to bid farewell to his bachelor life. Without much thought, the guy went off to a hotel with the woman where they spent a passionate night. The next morning, unexpectedly, Carlo confessed his love to the casual lover and promised to leave his fiancée for her. That same day, he confessed everything to Christina, stating he had fallen for someone else and no longer wanted the wedding. Christina handled the news with dignity, packed her belongings, and decided to move back to her parents' house temporarily while finding her own place. But when Carlo's father learned about his son's actions and that the engagement with Christina was broken off by his initiative, he was furious. He declared he didn't want to see his heir until he apologized to the bride-to-be and convinced her to marry him again. Once again, Carlo submitted to his father's will. After buying a huge bouquet of flowers, he headed to the Omas residence. Christina's parents opposed him. They had disliked this peculiar young man even before the news of his infidelity and the broken engagement, and now they certainly didn't want to see him. But the final decision was Christina's to make. After some thought, she decided to forgive her fiancé and give him another chance. The wedding and Mr. Lissi's double life. The wedding took place as planned, and the money gifted by relatives was invested in buying their own home in Mata Visconti. Initially, their marital life seemed quite blissful. Both held high-ranking positions with substantial salaries, affording them not just the necessities, but also travel, entertainment, and more. In 2009, they welcomed their first child, a daughter named Julia, and in 2013, Christina gave birth to a son, Gabriel. To the outside world, they appeared as a happy family, full of love and understanding. Carlo seemed to do everything to please his wife, not out of deep love or respect, but rather to avoid disputes. Christina was content with their life together, oblivious to the double life her husband led. At home, he was the exemplary family man, spending time with his wife and kids. Yet in Milan, where Carlo commuted daily for work, he transformed entirely. He frequently engaged in flings and casual encounters, meeting women in cafes, shopping centers, or even on the street. The handsome, stylishly dressed man in his expensive car almost always received reciprocated interest, but these affairs typically ended after a few dates. Carlo enjoyed the control and dominance in these short-term relationships, deciding when to see his next conquest and when to leave her. At home, Christina held the reins, with Carlo merely following her lead. However, rumors of his escapades eventually reached Christina. Each time she confronted him, Carlo swore it was all lies and slander. In 2013, shortly after the birth of their second child, Carlo seriously considered leaving his family for one of his mistresses, to the point of admitting his intentions to his wife. Christina countered with compelling arguments against their separation, particularly highlighting how it would upset his parents. Carlo had no choice but to concede to her reasoning, new love, and a horrific plan to escape marital ties.
A year later, in early 2014, a new employee named Maria, young and attractive, joined Carlo's workplace. He fell for her instantly, unable to think of anyone else. He tried everything to catch her attention, giving small gifts, complimenting her, and asking her out repeatedly. However, Maria was clear about not wanting to engage with a married co-worker who had 2 children, but Carlo, persistent in his pursuit, seemed to ignore her protests and didn't think of giving up. Moreover, Carlo began to blame his family for his unhappiness, believing his wife and children were obstacles to his personal joy. He convinced himself he had never been happy in his marriage, or in life for that matter. But with Maria, he imagined he could have the perfect relationship. If only he wasn't bound by his marital ties and responsibilities as a father. The more he dwelled on this thought, the darker his contemplations became. Carlo broached the subject of divorce again, but his wife once more convinced him it was a bad idea, and he found no arguments to counter hers. Frustrated, he started looking online for divorce lawyers, but realized after a few consultations that he would have to surrender half of his assets to Christina and also pay child support. Unwilling to accept such an outcome, he began researching how to end a person's life quickly and without arousing suspicion. Delving into various criminal stories, Carlo stumbled upon an article about an armed robbery that had occurred a few years prior in Mata Visconti. The robbers had fatally stabbed the homeowner before fleeing with the loot, remaining undetected to this day. A monstrous plan took shape in Carlo's mind to recreate a similar robbery scenario, but this time the intended victims would be the mother and children. The last day of the Lissi family. The last day for Christina and the children was Friday, June 13th, 2014. Carlo had the day off and spent it with his family, giving them a farewell party, so to speak. They went to an amusement park together, then went to the mall for shopping, and spent the evening at a popular local cafe. The man did his best to make sure that as many people as possible saw him and his family that day, and everyone noticed how happy they were. After returning home, the couple put the children to bed in their rooms on the 2nd floor and went downstairs to the living room where they made love. It was part of Carlo's cunning plan to avert suspicion. He knew that the examination would establish the fact that he and Christina had consensual intimacy, and who would think that after that a man would suddenly take the life of his wife and children? The woman knew that her husband was going to watch soccer with friends and assumed that he went to get dressed, and she herself settled down in the living room at the TV. But Carlo at that time went to the kitchen, where he took a large knife and stealthily crept up to his wife from behind. He stabbed her in the side of the neck, but Christina not only remained conscious, but also rushed to escape. Apparently, she did not immediately realize who had attacked her, and when she turned around and saw her distraught husband with a knife in his hand, she was shocked. The victim tried to defend herself and dislodged the knife, causing the man's hand to slip and injuring his palm. Despite her efforts, the strength disparity was too great. Carlo continued his assault until Christina showed no signs of life. She died without understanding why her loved one could commit such a horrific act. Then, Carlo went upstairs and cut the throats of his sleeping 5-year-old daughter and his 18-month-old son. Experts later concluded that the children likely did not suffer and probably didn't even wake up. Neighbors, some of whom heard loud screams, did not call the police, thinking the noise quickly subsided. Had they been more vigilant, the children's lives might have been saved. After completing the deed, Carlo clumsily staged a robbery, slightly moving and scattering items, erased his fingerprints from the weapon, cleaned the floor where he had stepped in fresh blood, and then went to a rarely used basement shower to wash off the blood. However, he inexplicably put back on the same underwear, which had small blood splatters unnoticed by him in the moment of the attack. Following this, the perpetrator bandaged his cut hand, dressed up, and casually went to a sports bar to watch football and drink beer with friends. He behaved naturally, and his friends, later testifying in court, could not fathom that he had just committed a triple homicide against his own family. Towards the end of the match, Carlo sent a couple of messages to his wife's phone, updating her on the score and professing his love, adding that he would be home soon. He returned around 3 a.m. and staged a dramatic discovery of the crime, making several critical mistakes. Firstly, he recorded the scene on his phone's camera, intending to create an alibi by pretending to discover the disorder and then the body of his wife, before running outside in panic. His second mistake was failing to turn off the camera, resulting in footage that completely contradicted his alibi and testimony, investigation, and evidence. Carlo's initial claim of a robbery was quickly dismissed in the early hours of the investigation, following the crime scene examination. Doors and windows were intact, indicating that the perpetrator had unrestricted access to the house. Nothing of value, nor anything at all, was missing despite money and Christina's jewelry box being in plain sight. The disorder appeared staged, with items merely toppled or displaced rather than searched through. Most importantly, there was no logical reason for robbers to harm the children sleeping upstairs in their beds. Thus, the case was swiftly reclassified as a deliberate act of ending lives. Carlo, becoming the prime suspect immediately, gave inconsistent statements and couldn't clearly explain the fresh cut on his palm. When he was taken into custody and his clothing was sent for analysis, experts quickly found tiny blood splatters on them. However, Carlo claimed the blood must have come from when he attempted to revive his family members, yet the stains were too small and located on the back of his clothing, suggesting they could only have originated from the knife's motion during the act. Regarding the video Carlo provided to the authorities, it clearly showed that he didn't approach his wife's body to check for a pulse or go upstairs to the children, but ran outside immediately and didn't return. Despite this, he claimed his family was no longer alive, and knew for certain all three were ended with a knife. The discovery of a bloodied cloth in the trash, which the culprit used to clean up, was the final piece of damning evidence. A psychopath, but is he sane? After the man was arrested, all his attempts to feign grief ceased. He became calm and unconcerned, and once in his cell, he simply went to sleep. Carlo felt no guilt or remorse, no pity for his own children or his wife, but he continued to insist on his own innocence, despite the fact that all the evidence was against him. A search history had been reconstructed on the killer's seized laptop, giving the investigation an insight into exactly when Lissi began planning to kill his family. There was now no doubt that it was a premeditated crime, but as yet the motive remained unclear. When the man realized that there was no point in denying, he began to confess, telling how exactly he got rid of his loved ones. But the answer to the main question shocked everyone. Explaining the motives for his action, he said that he could not just divorce Christine, because then they would have to share a lot of jointly acquired property, including the house, cars, and the family bank account. And he was not satisfied with this. In addition, there would be a burden in the form of 2 children who would have to pay child support. And all this, according to Carlo, would interfere with their happy life with Maria, for which, in fact, he decided to commit a crime. About all this, the murderer spoke quite calmly and indifferently. That he is a psychopath, no one has no doubt, but it was unclear whether this man is sane. The psychiatric examination established that Lissi was aware of his actions and fully realized what he was doing, but he did not feel any remorse either at the time of the crime or afterwards. In January 2015, Carlo was sentenced to life in prison. He listened to the judge's verdict indifferently, noting only that he thought so. Sometime later, the man tried to file an appeal, but soon withdrew it himself, saying that it was all useless. Finally, Lissi's father died of a heart attack shortly after his son was convicted and sent to prison. He simply could not accept the fact that he had raised a real monster, devoid of a sense of pity and remorse.
Why was the beauty queen robbed of her life? They say beauty is a powerful force capable of saving the world, but unfortunately, it does not guarantee happiness and can sometimes lead to trouble. Beautiful girls are always the center of attention, usually with many admirers. However, renowned beauties and crowned beauty queens are not only surrounded by fans and patrons, but also by many envious people, ill-wishers, and obsessed stalkers capable of unpredictable actions. The case of the tragic demise of the young Kimberly Oliveira shocked all of South America, becoming one of the most shocking and resonant. The girl, who won several beauty contests and was a contender for the title of Miss Brazil, was brutally and treacherously deprived of life. She dreamed of fame and recognition, but they turned out to be very different from what the model had imagined. Her name indeed became widely known far beyond her native country, and people admired Kimberly's beauty and youth. At the same time, they were horrified by the terrible manner in which she ended her life in the prime of her years, and by the many heights she could have still reached. Who was Kimberly Oliveira? Kimberly Karen Mota de Oliveira was born on February 26, 1998, in the small yet cozy Brazilian town of Manacor, located in the municipality of the same name in the state of Amazonas. She was the eldest child and the only daughter in the family of Leila and Jose Oliveira, and was raised alongside her 2 younger brothers. The girl had Brazilian, Spanish, and Indian roots, and it can be said she won the genetic lottery. She possessed incredibly attractive looks that drew the eyes of those around her like a magnet. Kimberly had flawless skin, luxurious thick hair, a dazzling smile, and a slender feminine figure. The beauty was used to universal attention, admiration, and adoration, with her peers and adults alike comparing her to an angel. From a young age, she engaged in dance and gymnastics, loved swimming, and meticulously took care of her appearance and manners. At the same time, she excelled in school, read a lot, regularly visited the theater, and studied foreign languages. Already in her teenage years, Kimberly began participating in various beauty contests, where she won prizes and also modeled in advertisements and clothing catalogs. In high school, she firmly decided she wanted to connect her life with the modeling business, especially since her mother Leila was also a recognized beauty in her youth and won several titles, including Miss Manacor. However, Leila later married and sacrificed her modeling career for the sake of her family and raising 3 children. Kimberly realized she had outstanding physical attributes and loved to pose in front of the camera. She was featured several times in fashion magazines, participated in shows, and won the official title of the most beautiful girl in her hometown. She also reached the finals of the Miss Amazonas contest in 2017, prepared to participate in it again, and was a serious contender for the title of Miss Brazil. In case of victory, she could have gone on to prestigious contests like Miss World or Miss Universe. However, Oliveira understood well that to win at such a high level, beauty and charisma alone were not enough. Contestants there are also evaluated based on their intelligence, education, moral qualities, charitable activities, and so on. Additionally, contenders for the beauty queen crown must not have criminal records, legal issues, or photo shoots in the nude style. Kimberly actively managed her social media accounts, where she promoted a healthy lifestyle, sports, and proper nutrition. She also detailed her life, posted shots from various photo shoots, and simply interacted with her growing number of followers. By 2019, her page on a popular social network had several tens of thousands of followers. The model aimed to be a role model, inspiring and motivating her followers. At 19, she decided to pursue higher education and aimed to enter medical school to become a dentist. To achieve this, Kimberly moved to Manaus, the capital and largest metropolis of the state of Amazonas, where her maternal uncle Henry lived. After successfully passing the necessary exams and enrolling in the university, she moved from a quiet, cozy place to a huge, bustling city, settling in her relative's house. Oliveira quickly adapted to her new environment, made friends, and successfully combined her studies with sports, advertising shoots, and participation in various projects. Persistent and cunning admirer. In her free time from studies and photo shoots, Kimberly usually spent time with her friends, often hanging out in various places as a large group. In the fall of 2019, Kimberly and her close friend were enjoying themselves at a popular club when a handsome young man named Rafael Fernandez Rodriguez approached them. He wanted to get to know Oliveira and offered to buy her a cocktail. However, the model, accustomed to the heightened attention towards her and knowing how to handle such situations, politely declined, noting that she was not alone and didn't need anything. Rafael simply apologized for the disturbance and left, but the girl didn't yet know that this entire scene was premeditated and orchestrated by the stranger. The fact was that the man had been following the young model's social media page for about a year, closely observing her, but never attempting to make contact until that day. He knew well the places the beauty frequented and decided to act, pretending to see her for the first time and merely wanting to meet her. At that time, Rodriguez was 31 years old, recently divorced, and obsessed with the idea of meeting and starting a romance with Kimberly. Learning from posts and stories that the model had moved to Manaus, he also moved to the city, where, having a legal education, he quickly found a high-paying job in corporate law and rented a spacious apartment in an elite residential complex. Then he began implementing his plan, closely monitoring Oliveira, waiting for the right moment to approach her. After the unsuccessful attempt to meet at the nightclub, Rafael decided to step out of the shadows and started sending the girl private messages on social media, inviting her on a date. He also actively commented on and liked all the posts the model shared on her profile. For several months, she ignored the persistent follower, paying him no special attention as she regularly encountered similar situations, and this guy didn't particularly stand out. Rodriguez then changed his tactics, adding Kimberly's classmates, friends, and even relatives to his friends list, trying to befriend them and gain their trust. This plan succeeded, and he managed to obtain her phone number from one of her close acquaintances. The obsessed stalker then began messaging her in instant messengers, suggesting they meet. The man studied the object of his admiration well, knowing what she liked, where she went, what music she listened to, and so on. He started attending outdoor training sessions occasionally conducted by Oliveira herself, and only there did he manage to catch her attention. They finally talked, and after that, they began regularly calling and messaging each other on social networks. Raphael managed to pique the girl's interest as he was well prepared. Despite a significant age difference of almost 10 years, an easygoing friendship developed between the young people. The man cautiously approached, trying to court and please the girl beautifully without scaring her off, but also not letting her forget about him. His tactic worked perfectly, and in March 2020, Kimberly and Raphael declared themselves a couple and started officially dating. Obsessed owner. The attractive and romantic guy who did everything to win the beauty's affection revealed his true colors as soon as they began dating. He started literally monitoring his beloved's every move, wanting to know everything about where she went, whom she communicated with, who messaged her, and so on. Initially, the girl even found it amusing, as no one had ever restricted or controlled her before. However, the situation worsened daily, and Raphael's behavior became increasingly intrusive and aggressive. He now decided which photos Kimberly could post on social media, when and if she could go live, whom to respond to and whom to block. Soon she grew tired of this, attempted to set personal boundaries the guy couldn't cross, and they had a serious argument. Rodriguez had to apologize, and to make amends, he invited the girl to a luxurious restaurant and gave her a huge bouquet of flowers. He repeated this after each quarrel to avoid losing Oliveira, whom he had pursued so long and persistently. The man gave her expensive gifts, organized romantic dates at trendy spots, and said he would never leave her. Kimberly increasingly complained to her friends about her boyfriend, saying she couldn't take a step without his permission and approval. Raphael forbade her from talking to guys even at the university, took her phone without permission, checked calls and messages, and then created scenes. Sometimes, he got so furious that the girl feared for her safety. Her friends confirmed this was abnormal, advised her to have a serious talk with the guy, and if nothing changed, to leave him before it was too late. Kimberly also understood she didn't want to live like this, knowing a brilliant modeling career, diploma defense, world travels, photo shoots for fashion magazines, fame, and recognition awaited her. She didn't want to give it all up for uncertain relations with an unstable and obsessed owner who restricted, controlled, and sought to possess her like an object. Final decision. By early May 2020, after 2 exhausting months of relationship, Kimberly decided to break up with Raphael, but was unsure how to do it without triggering his anger. She waited for the right moment to announce the breakup, but it was no longer possible to delay. On May 10th, Brazil celebrated Mother's Day, a holiday Kimberly always spent with her mom. However, due to restrictions imposed by the raging COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, she couldn't travel to her hometown to congratulate her mother. Instead, Kimberly posted a photo of them together with a touching caption and words of gratitude. At the time, Leila was in the hospital undergoing treatment after being diagnosed with cancer. After posting, Kimberly went for a run in the park with a few friends, including Raphael. Everyone who saw the couple that day claimed they weren't arguing, were talking nicely, and no one except her close friend knew that the model planned to break up with her boyfriend that evening and had already made her decision. At noon, Kimberly called her uncle and told him she would spend the day with her best friend Gabriella, but would return home to sleep. Later, she called Henry again, asking him not to lock the front door because she forgot her keys and promised to be back by midnight. Henry did as asked and went to bed, fully trusting his niece. In the evening, while at her friend's place, Kimberly rehearsed what she planned to tell her boyfriend. She carefully chose words to avoid hurting his feelings and to prevent any outbursts of anger, although it was very difficult. Finally, she seemed to have found the right delicate phrases and was ready for the important conversation. Around 9 in the evening, Raphael arrived at her friend's house in his brand new white Audi. Kimberly walked out to him with a smile, waved goodbye to Gabriella, and got into the passenger seat next to the driver. No one saw the girl alive again. Mysterious disappearance of the couple. On the morning of May 11th, when Henry woke up, He realized his niece hadn't come home and became very worried. Kimberly always told him when she would return and informed him if she planned to stay over at a friend's place. He tried to contact her, but her phone was off. He then called Gabriella, who said that Kimberly left with her boyfriend and hadn't been in touch since. Henry called Raphael, but he didn't answer, which was very strange. It soon became clear that the girl didn't show up for her university classes, something she had never done before. By noon, convinced that his niece was missing and no one had seen her, Henry went to the police to file a report about the disappearance of the girl and her boyfriend. However, the authorities just laughed at him, saying Oliveira and her boyfriend were adults and could go wherever they wanted without telling anyone. Henry and a few friends of the missing girl began searching on their own. They first went to Raphael's apartment, but no one answered the door. His car was also missing from the parking spot. Everything indicated that the couple had indeed gone somewhere together, but Kimberly's close ones knew she would never disappear without telling anyone. By evening, Henry called his sister Leila and told her what had happened. He didn't want to worry his relative, who was battling a severe illness, but he couldn't wait any longer since she had also been trying to contact her daughter all day and suspected something was wrong. He tried to reassure her that nothing bad could have happened to Kimberly since she didn't keep bad company, had no harmful habits, and avoided trouble. Kimberly's friends began massively posting her photos on their social media pages and various groups, asking for any information about the girl's or her boyfriend, Raphael's, whereabouts. Since the young model was quite a popular figure, news of her disappearance went viral, and thousands of followers joined the search. However, this yielded no results. Grim discovery in a locked apartment. The police only began to act on May 12th, nearly 2 days after the couple's disappearance. A search warrant was obtained for Raphael's apartment, as it might contain clues or hints about the whereabouts of the young people. But what the authorities discovered when they forced open the locked door and entered the premises shocked everyone. Kimberly was in one of the rooms, but unfortunately, there was nothing that could be done to save her. The lifeless body of the young girl lay on the bedroom floor in a large pool of her own blood, covered with a sheet. There were also several large bloodstains on the bed, and blood traces and smears on the carpets and floor coverings were found in almost every room. It was evident that the criminal had panicked, trying to cover up the evidence, but soon realized it was futile and simply fled, turning the air conditioner on full blast to slow down the body's decomposition, so no one would suspect a body was in the apartment. The forensic experts found 4 stab wounds on the victim's body, 2 to the chest and 2 to the neck. The weapon used was a large kitchen knife, which lay in the next room with traces of blood and clear fingerprints of the criminal. The perpetrator didn't even try to get rid of it or wipe off the traces, but just threw it on the floor. Judging by the absence of defensive wounds or signs of a struggle on the body, the girl was most likely attacked suddenly when she least expected it. It appears the attack happened on the bed, but she was finished off on the floor with a blow to the neck, severing her carotid artery. The apartment owner was nowhere to be found, and his documents, some personal items, bank cards, and car keys were missing. The state of the rooms indicated he had left in a hurry. If Raphael was previously considered missing, he was now reclassified as the prime suspect in the brutal crime. But where to look for him, and could he have left the country by now? Hunt for the fugitive criminal. The forensic examination confirmed that the fingerprints on the crime weapon belonged to the missing Rodriguez. No traces of other people were found in the apartment. At the time of the crime, only the criminal and the victim were present, dispelling any remaining doubts about the man's guilt. Alerts about Raphael were immediately sent to police stations across the state and circulated widely on social media, noting that a dangerous criminal was being sought and requesting any information about his whereabouts. Additionally, a search was launched for the white Audi that the suspect drove. Detectives understood that every minute counted, so they checked all reports from vigilant citizens. On May 13th, news came that a white Audi was found crashed in a ditch by the roadside in the neighboring state of Caracaraí. The car, as it turned out, belonged to the suspect. Surveillance footage showed Raphael driving at high speed. It seems he lost control. The car veered off the road and overturned. However, it was unknown how badly the driver was injured and where he went. There was speculation that he might have hitchhiked to the Venezuelan border and fled there. Failed attempt to cross the border. It was soon learned that the injured man in the accident was indeed picked up by a passing car and taken to a nearby town. There, Rodriguez took a taxi to the nearest bank, withdrew almost all the money from his account, and then took the same taxi to the border town of Boa Vista. From there, he attempted to cross the border into Venezuela on foot to escape justice. Fortunately, his attempt to leave the country was unsuccessful. Due to restrictions related to the worsening COVID-19 situation, the man was not allowed to pass. He could have returned to Boa Vista, a city of nearly 300,000 people, and tried to blend in, but detectives found out that the suspect preferred to hide in the wooded area, waiting for things to quiet down. After a couple of days of searching, the fugitive was found deep in the forest, in a small hut almost camouflaged by the surrounding environment. However, the arrest didn't go smoothly. The police were suddenly attacked by men wielding machetes, whom Rodriguez had hired from the local population for personal protection, paying them generously in cash. Fortunately, there was no bloodshed, as the authorities showed their badges and explained they were there to apprehend a dangerous criminal. They informed the bodyguards that aiding the criminal could result in serious legal consequences for them as well. Raphael's version. By the time the main suspect was arrested, the police already had all the evidence of his guilt, so denying it was pointless. Surveillance footage showed Kimberly getting into his car, arriving at his place, going up to his apartment, and then Rodriguez leaving alone a few hours later, fleeing the scene. Interestingly, in all the videos, the couple appeared calm, chatting pleasantly and smiling. Raphael left the apartment calmly, clearly not feeling fear, remorse, or guilt. Under the weight of evidence, the suspect admitted his guilt, but presented a rather strange version of the events of that day. According to him, he and his beloved decided to have a romantic evening and went to his apartment for that purpose, where they had intimate moments. Afterward, Kimberly went to take a shower, and Raphael decided to check her phone, finding out she had been chatting with several guys on social media. He wanted to confront her directly about it, but first went to the kitchen and took a large knife, hiding it under a pillow. He claimed he did not intend to harm her, but only wanted to scare her if she tried to deceive him. When Oliveira came out of the shower and lay on the bed, Raphael immediately started questioning her about whom she was communicating with. The girl just smiled and said she wasn't talking to any men. This infuriated Rodriguez. He realized his beloved was lying and mocking him. He grabbed the knife and quickly inflicted 2 blows to her heart. The victim didn't have time to understand or resist, but slipped off the bed onto the floor, where the attacker delivered 2 more fatal blows to her neck. Realizing what he had done, Raphael tried to cover up the traces, but quickly understood it was futile. He couldn't remove the body from the apartment unnoticed, and the suspicion would still fall on him. So, he simply covered the body with a sheet and turned the air conditioner on full blast to keep the room as cold as possible, slowing the decomposition process. Witness testimonies. Kimberly's best friend, Gabriella, testified as a witness, providing a completely different version of events. According to her, Kimberly had finally decided to break up with her aggressive and mentally unstable boyfriend that evening. She had spent a long time carefully preparing what to say, knowing that one wrong word could send Raphael into a rage. Gabriella insisted that Kimberly would not have been intimate with a man she planned to leave, and certainly wouldn't have joked about messaging other guys, knowing his reactions were always unpredictable. Another witness was the defendant's ex-wife, who confirmed that Rodriguez was a cruel person who suffered from uncontrollable fits of anger, affecting everyone around him. His aggression was the primary reason for their divorce. Raphael's only supporter was his mother, Fatima, who claimed that he was a good person and never meant harm to anyone. She blamed Kimberly, her ex-daughter-in-law, and everyone else for driving her boy to sin. lenient sentence, and its aftermath. Rodriguez's father did not live to see the trial. Realizing what kind of monster he had raised, the elderly man chose to end his life by stepping in front of a train. His widow insisted it was an accident, saying her husband felt unwell and accidentally fell onto the tracks. However, surveillance footage clearly showed otherwise. The defendant's legal team pushed the narrative of his insanity, repeatedly delaying the case by requesting new psychiatric evaluations. Ultimately, Raphael was deemed capable of standing trial for his heinous act. The trial began in October 2021, nearly a year and a half after the brutal crime. Despite the overwhelming evidence of his guilt, Raphael received a surprisingly lenient sentence of only 14 years in prison, later reduced by another year. This outcome was due to the defense's successful argument that their client had acted in a fit of rage when he committed the crime. As a result, instead of life imprisonment, he received a significantly lighter punishment. On the day of the sentencing, October 28th, Kimberly's mother, Leila Oliveira, passed away after a long battle with cancer. She had followed every court session via video call from her hospital bed, where she was in very poor condition. Just a few hours after the verdict was announced, her heart stopped. The Oliveira family lost two beloved members in less than a year and a half. First their cherished sister and daughter, then their loving wife and mother. Meanwhile, Rodriguez's mother vowed to wait for her son to be released from prison, as he was the only close family she had left after her husband's death.
The case of Michelle O'Keefe. Who killed the aspiring actress? The judicial system, unfortunately, is not perfect, even in the most developed and democratic countries. Innocent people sometimes end up serving time for crimes they did not commit, a result of investigative errors or other mishaps. Such injustices usually come to light only when the real culprit is found and proven guilty. But what happens when someone convicted of murder is exonerated years later while the real perpetrator remains unpunished because crucial evidence was lost by the police at the time? The case of young American Michelle O'Keefe, killed under mysterious circumstances in the early 2000s, shook the nation. The investigation lasted several years until the main, and essentially the only suspect, was imprisoned for a significant term. It seemed the case was closed, but after 11 years in prison, the convicted person's innocence was proven. Simultaneously, new details emerged, and another suspect appeared, likely the real murderer. However, more than 2 decades since the student's murder, her parents have become disillusioned with justice, losing hope that the person who took their daughter's life will face fair punishment. Let's delve into this story from the beginning and try to understand where the investigation went wrong and whether these errors could have been avoided. Who was Michelle O'Keefe? Michelle Teresa O'Keefe was born on October 11, 1981, in the quiet town of Hanford, California. The eldest of 2 children born to Patricia and Michael O'Keefe, Michelle grew up alongside her younger brother, Jason. The O'Keefes were a well-off family, owning a profitable local store. Her parents were committed to ensuring their children received a quality education and could fully realize their talents and potential. Michelle was an exemplary student, excelled in sports and ballroom dancing, and was known for her attractive and artistic demeanor. She dreamed of becoming a famous actress, appearing in films, and conquering Hollywood. She possessed the talent, ambition, and attributes necessary for such a feat. After graduating high school with honors, Michelle easily gained admission to one of California's prestigious colleges. She continued her passion for dancing and took evening acting classes. Michelle actively participated in various events, appeared in commercials, and was often seen as an extra in movie and music video shoots. On her 18th birthday, her loving parents gifted her a luxurious blue Ford Mustang with a new Edge design concept. Michelle had always dreamt of owning this car and was overjoyed to receive it as a present. Unfortunately, it was this striking vehicle that likely drew the attention of her killer, leading to the tragic demise of the young Michelle. The last shoot. On February 22, 2000, 18-year-old Michelle O'Keefe and her close friend Jennifer Peterson, also an aspiring actress, headed to Palmdale, a scenic town in Los Angeles County, for a video shoot. They were to appear in the latest music video by the popular rock musician Robert James Ritchie, better known by his stage name, Kid Rock. Jennifer and Michelle were extras, dancing and revealing outfits for the video. The shoot consumed nearly the entire day, so by the time they returned to their cars parked at the nearby amusement park, it had almost darkened. Jennifer planned to go home, but Michelle had acting classes that evening. The friends chatted in the parking lot for a few minutes before parting ways. Jennifer walked to her car, while Michelle decided to stay behind to change into her regular clothes. She felt it inappropriate to attend her acting classes in the same outfit she wore for the video shoot, as it was quite provocative. With nowhere private to change on the parking lot, and finding it awkward to do so in her car, Michelle opted to quickly change her clothes right there on the street, next to her car, believing she was alone. This decision, unfortunately, likely proved to be a fatal mistake. Jennifer recalled lingering in the parking lot a while longer, chatting with her boyfriend on the phone. As she started to leave, she noticed the headlights of Michelle's Ford Mustang turning on. Believing Michelle was about to follow her, Jennifer felt reassured that her friend was safe. With loud music playing in her car, the last thing Jennifer saw before turning the corner was what she thought was Michelle's Mustang starting to back out. The murder of an aspiring actress. That evening, a young security guard named Raymond Lee Jennings was on duty at the park and its attractions. Around 9 o'clock, the 25-year-old heard sounds resembling gunshots emanating from the direction of the parking lot, followed by a car alarm. Lacking a firearm and equipped only with a taser, he hesitated to approach alone, knowing he stood little chance against armed assailants. Jennings promptly called his supervisor, Iris Malone, and reported the incident, also alerting the police. Malone arrived within minutes, so before law enforcement reached the scene, she and Jennings decided to cautiously inspect the situation at the parking lot. They immediately noticed a blue car, backed out into the middle lane and halted there with its headlights on and engine running. This was Michelle's Ford Mustang. The car owner was in the driver's seat, motionless and showing no signs of life. Upon closer inspection, Malone and Jennings observed blood inside the car and on Michelle's body, along with several bullet wounds. The driver's door was wide open, and the crime scene appeared horrific. It seemed that Michelle had been chased and initially wounded in the parking lot. She had tried to escape, leapt into her car, and even managed to start it. But the assailant caught up to her and fired several more shots, depriving the student of any chance of survival. Michelle's appearance was quite provocative. She had bright makeup and a tousled hairstyle, styled specifically for the video shoot. She was also wearing regular jeans and a shiny top. Apparently, Michelle had partially changed in the parking lot, as a shiny mini skirt matching the top, and a regular t-shirt were found next to her on the passenger seat. One of her shoes was on her foot, while the other lay away on the parking lot, presumably dropped as she dashed to her car. Crime scene investigation. Following the security guard and his supervisor, the first to arrive at the crime scene was the local sheriff's deputy. He noted that the young woman showed no signs of life, but he informed emergency services in case he was mistaken, and she still had a chance of being saved. He also recorded the statements of Jennings and Malone. The arriving police officers began a thorough examination of the crime scene, gathering all possible evidence. They found several shell casings on the parking lot and noticed a bullet mark on the asphalt, slightly away from the car. This led to the conclusion that the perpetrator likely first fired a shot into the ground to intimidate the victim, then shot at her directly, as evidenced by bloodstains on the parking lot. The victim had run towards her car but didn't manage to escape, as the assailant caught up to her and fired several more shots. She died almost instantly from extensive injuries and significant blood loss. In total, 5 shell casings were found on the ground. Experts concluded that all shots were fired from the same weapon, but the bullets significantly differed from each other, raising questions that needed prompt answers. Also found on the ground was an earring, presumably dropped by the victim. Later, her friend identified this item, confirming it belonged to Michelle. However, the second earring was not found on or near the victim. This detail, unfortunately, was initially deemed insignificant and was forgotten for a long time, which turned out to be a crucial oversight. Theories and speculations initially, close relatives and friends of the murdered young woman were interviewed. They unanimously asserted that Michelle had no enemies or ill-wishers. Known for her sociable, open, and very friendly nature, everyone who knew her spoke highly of the student. Thus, a personal motive for the murder was almost immediately ruled out. The next theory considered was an unsuccessful robbery or carjacking attempt of her new vehicle. However, this seemed doubtful. The only personal item missing was her mobile phone, which she had used just minutes before the attack to tell her mother that the filming was over and she was heading back. Michelle's purse, containing her wallet and a couple of $100s in cash, was found at the passenger's feet. Police speculated that in the confusion and darkness, the assailant might have failed to notice the purse, and fearing the gunshot sounds had attracted security, didn't search the car. This could also explain why the carjacking attempt was aborted. It seemed the attacker initially did not intend to shoot, but only to threaten her with the weapon, but something went wrong. Another theory proposed that Michelle might have been mistaken for a lady of the night due to her appearance. She was dressed provocatively, with heavy makeup and high heels. It was possible the criminal noticed her on her way to the parking lot and followed her. In the darkness, he might have approached her with ill intentions, but upon being firmly rejected, he took her life in retaliation. Supporting this theory was the fact that her top was partially pulled down, exposing her left breast. This suggested that the attacker was likely a man. However, it was also possible that her thin, strapped clothing slipped during the scuffle, chase, or as the frightened, wounded young woman attempted to get into her car. The sole suspect. The first person interrogated was Raymond, the security guard on duty at the parking lot, who was believed to be the sole witness of the incident. He confirmed hearing gunshots and a car alarm around 9 in the evening, immediately reporting it to his supervisor and calling the police. Raymond noted he saw no one on the parking lot before or after the shots. No one fled or left the scene in the minutes following. Given that the time was still early and the area was popular, it's plausible that others nearby might have seen or heard something. Police became interested in Raymond's background and discovered that, despite his relatively young age, he was the head of a large family, raising 5 children. He served in the California National Guard and aspired to be a law enforcer, working while also studying at the police academy, gaining certain knowledge and skills. As the main witness to the murder, Raymond sought to help the investigation, naively thinking that this experience would be beneficial for his academy exams. When investigators asked him to present his version of events during an interrogation, Raymond detailed his perspective on how things might have unfolded. Being a top student, he meticulously considered all details, trying to piece together a coherent picture. He hypothesized where the attacker and victim might have been during the initial gunshot and how subsequent events unfolded. He based his story on the evidence, the location of shell casings, blood droplets, the victim's belongings, and the car. He also estimated the shooting distances. At that time, Raymond didn't realize that he was unwittingly digging his own grave. He just wanted to assist the investigation and be useful. However, the detectives investigating the case drew their own conclusions, suggesting that such detailed knowledge could only be possessed by the murderer himself. Since there were no other suspects, the security guard was charged with the girl's murder. New witnesses. Several weeks after Michelle's murder, a 17-year-old African-American girl named Victoria Richardson came to the police's attention. She had been in the parking lot on that tragic evening with her 18-year-old boyfriend and a couple of friends. They had been horseback riding in the park and returned to the parking lot after dark on February 22nd. According to Victoria, they were in their car, music blaring, preparing to leave when they heard unusual sounds. Initially, they mistook them for firecrackers or fireworks, paying little attention, but then realized they were gunshots. Victoria recalled seeing, just a minute and a half earlier, a man in a security guard's uniform walking towards a parked blue Ford Mustang nearby. After the strange sounds and the activation of a car alarm, the friends got out of their car and saw the Mustang, which had rolled backwards and stopped, no longer moving. Reportedly, they saw the security guard again, who warned them of an armed person on the parking lot and advised caution. Hearing this, the group hurried back into their car and cautiously left the parking lot, trying not to draw attention. When asked to describe the guard they interacted with, Victoria mentioned he was a middle-aged, heavy-set African-American man. This description matched another employee who had worked in the parking lot the day before Raymond's shift. This second guard was immediately detained and questioned. He had a solid alibi as he was at a family gathering at the time of the murder, confirmed by about 20 people. Therefore, despite inconsistencies in the witnesses' accounts, Jennings remained the sole suspect. Prolonged investigation and arrest. After 5 years, the investigation insisted that Raymond was the killer, partly because his knowledge and skills in forensics could convincingly deflect suspicion away from himself. However, evidence and witness testimonies didn't align coherently. The crime itself appeared irrational and odd, with no apparent motive for the suspect. Raymond had his own legally acquired pistol, which wasn't with him on the night of the murder. He presented this weapon to the police, and forensic analysis confirmed that the bullets weren't fired from it. Investigators speculated that he might have hidden unregistered firearms, but this theory was unsubstantiated. Meanwhile, the murdered girl's parents conducted their own investigation, hiring private detectives. Patricia and Michael felt the law enforcement was inadequately handling the case or simply inactive. They actively engaged in interviews and TV appearances, sharing their story to pressure the authorities. They were convinced that Raymond was responsible for Michelle's death and should be punished. Although there were no strong reasons to detain him initially, Raymond went to Iraq for military service, where he stayed for almost 5 years. Upon returning to the United States, he was immediately arrested and jailed. Raymond consented to a polygraph test but failed, which worked against him. Unable to post the $1 million bail set, he had to remain in custody for about a year while investigators and his defense prepared for trial. Trial and verdict. According to the prosecution, the security guard, Raymond, mistook Michelle in her revealing outfit for a sex worker and followed her to her car. After she rebuffed his advances, a scorned Raymond opened fire and then radioed his boss about the incident, stating he wouldn't approach the crime scene. The defense highlighted that the murder weapon was never found, either on the day or later. There were no DNA traces, fingerprints, or any signs of Raymond's presence at the crime scene. Interestingly, epithelial particles under the victim's nails did not match Raymond's DNA. Instead of probing whose DNA it was, the investigators convinced the court it was incidental contamination unrelated to the case. Raymond's personal belongings, car, locker, and home were thoroughly searched for the murder weapon, but a gunpowder residue test on his clothing was strangely not conducted at the time. Notably, Raymond resigned a few days after the incident due to threats from unknown individuals and returned his work uniform, which police received only a week later. It was claimed that he had thoroughly washed the uniform before returning it, thus erasing any gunpowder traces. However, traces of sweat and dust on the uniform indicated it hadn't been washed. Victoria Richardson, the aforementioned witness, testified in court, stating she saw a guard at the parking lot during the shooting. But she didn't specify who she saw, citing darkness and possible confusion. The prosecution seized upon her testimony as evidence of Raymond's guilt. The jury deliberated for a week but couldn't reach a unanimous decision. As a result, a new trial was scheduled to give both sides time to prepare. In February 2009, 11 out of 12 jurors found Raymond guilty of murder. In December 2009, the Supreme Court convicted Raymond Jennings of murder under aggravating circumstances, sentencing him to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 40 years. Raymond maintained his innocence, asserting in his final statement that he had no remorse since he didn't commit the crime. However, Michelle's parents and brother were convinced of his guilt and satisfied with the verdict. New trial and acquittal. Raymond Jennings spent nearly 11 years incarcerated, losing hope in justice as his appeals were repeatedly denied. However, in late 2015, renowned attorney Jeffrey Ehrlich and his son Clinton, a law student at the time, took interest in his case. They revisited the case files and found numerous errors, inconsistencies, and blatant violations in the evidence and trial proceedings. The Ehrlichs believed Raymond was wrongfully convicted and set out to prove his innocence. They compiled all evidence and appealed to the department responsible for reviewing convictions. Specifically, they pointed out that Raymond's uniform showed no gunpowder residue or blood splatter, only sweat and dust, indicating it wasn't washed. Additionally, they noted that Raymond was unarmed, and detectives failed to consider other individuals present at the park that evening. New reports suggested the murder was a spontaneous act, likely a botched robbery attempt. Moreover, Victoria Richardson, the main witness, and her boyfriend, both with a criminal history, were serving time for armed robbery at the time of the final trial, but were never considered suspects. The mix of different cartridges fired from the same gun, unusual for someone with military training, hinted at a street gang style. Richardson and her boyfriend were part of such a gang, but since they weren't initially investigated for Michelle's murder, many leads were irretrievably lost. Notably, the boyfriend wore an earring resembling the one found at the crime scene on the night of the murder. Despite failing to prove the criminal couple's involvement in the aspiring actress's murder, the Ehrlichs successfully established Jennings's innocence. Consequently, the former guard was factually acquitted, a significant distinction from legal or presumptive innocence. Sergeant Raymond Jennings was released from prison after nearly 11 years for a crime he didn't commit. The judge noted that jurors weren't informed about the presence of gang members at the crime scene that evening. In March 2017, Jennings received a $500,000 compensation for the wrongful conviction. A devout man, he later stated that God had heard his prayers and justice had prevailed. Only Michelle O'Keefe's parents remained deeply upset, believing the man they thought killed their daughter was wrongly freed. Having also lost their son in a car accident, the O'Keefes divorced, clinging to the belief that their daughter's supposed killer had been punished. Despite the case remaining unsolved, the likelihood of anyone being held accountable for Michelle's murder is now extremely low.
Behind closed doors, you never really know what's happening in someone's home. Sometimes, not even the closest relatives or friends have a clue. What may look like a picture-perfect family from the outside could be hiding a deadly threat behind the scenes. Often people are too scared to share their troubles, not wanting to burden or upset their loved ones. It feels easier to face hardships alone than to drag others into their pain. But what happens when the issue is domestic violence? What if the partner feels untouchable, already instilling fear and submission in their significant other? In situations like this, victims often find themselves equally afraid of the physical abuse as they are of their partner leaving. The story of Julia Fairman shocked the entire city of Samara in January 2013 when a well-known young businessman brutally took the life of his wife and tried to make it look like a suicide. The case stirred up public outrage after it was revealed that the perpetrator faced absolutely no consequences for his crime. Alexandra Fairman was found guilty of taking the life of the mother of his child, but somehow the investigation's findings mysteriously shifted, and the incident was chalked up to a state of temporary insanity. Now, 11 years later, Julia's family is still fighting to find justice and see her killer punished. Julia and Alexander, a love story. Julia Sergeyevna Fairman, née Naumova, was born on August 21, 1986, in the city of Samara, located in the Middle Volga region of Russia. She came from a humble working-class family. Her father, Sergei Naumov, worked as a driver, and her mother, Lyudmila Ivanovna, was employed in the food service industry. Yulia's childhood wasn't easy, but her parents did everything they could to ensure she never went without. They were determined to give her a good upbringing and the best education they could afford. In 1993, Julia started attending Samara's public school #67, where she graduated in 2003. With her diploma in hand, she went on to study management at the Faculty of Economics and Management at Samara State Academy. She earned her degree in 2007, and soon after, she landed a job at a major local car dealership called VIP Auto. It was here that she met a young man named Alexander, and their romantic journey began. Alexander Mikhailovich Fairman was also a native of Samara. He was born in 1985 into a well-off family. During the 1990s, his father, Mikhail Fairman, amassed a fortune in the farming business. He became one of the wealthiest and most well-known figures in the city, raising cattle, owning factories that produced dairy products sold nationwide, and running beekeeping operations to sell honey and other bee products. His biggest success, however, came with the establishment of LLC Teplishny, one of the most successful agricultural enterprises in the Samara region and the entire Volga economic district. After finishing college, Alexander also briefly worked at the VIP auto dealership where he met Julia. The young, beautiful woman immediately caught his eye and he began courting her. Unfortunately for Julia, she responded to his attention, and they started a whirlwind romance that felt like a fairy tale at first. The couple dated for about a year and a half until in 2009, Alexander officially proposed. According to friends and family, Alexander orchestrated a romantic surprise for Julia when he proposed. He visited her unannounced, led her to the window, and gave a signal to his friends waiting outside. They released a balloon that had a small box attached to it, containing a beautiful engagement ring. He caught the balloon, slipped the ring onto her finger, and asked her to become his wife. Overwhelmed with happiness, Julia couldn't hold back her tears and said yes. The wedding took place later in 2009, shortly after their engagement. Alexander's parents spared no expense, throwing their beloved son a lavish celebration. They organized a massive party with a long guest list, a giant Hummer limousine, the city's most prestigious banquet hall, a trendy master of ceremonies, and an epic fireworks display to close out the evening. Julia's bridesmaids recalled how she glowed with joy, looking every bit like a fairy tale princess. Married life. To outsiders, the couple's life seemed picture-perfect and happy. They had a well-furnished apartment on Stavropolskaya Street, and they were living comfortably without any financial worries. By then, Alexander had started working at his father's company, LLC Teplishny, where he took on the role of executive director. Soon after their wedding, the couple started thinking about growing their family. However, for over a year, Julia couldn't get pregnant. Now, Alexander's relatives claim that the first real cracks in their marriage began showing during this time. But when the pregnancy test finally displayed those two long-awaited lines, they both believed that the arrival of a baby would save their marriage and strengthen their bond. Based on the joyful photos Julia shared on social media, it was clear they were eagerly anticipating the arrival of their child. On September 6, 2011, Julia gave birth to a baby boy, whom they named Pavel. A few days later, Julia posted on her social media, thanking everyone for their well wishes and announcing that the baby was born weighing 9 pounds 6 ounces and measuring 23.6 inches in length. During her maternity leave, Julia cherished every moment with her baby, as evidenced by the numerous photos of her and little Pavel. From the outside, her life looked like a dream. A loving husband, a healthy baby, a cozy home, financial security, and a strong family. Many of her friends envied her, but everything came crashing down in an instant, and the illusion of a perfect family vanished like smoke. The terrifying late-night call. In the early hours of January 4th, a phone call shattered the silence in the Naumov household. Half asleep, Lyudmila Ivanovna picked up the phone, not fully comprehending what was being said. It was her son-in-law Alexander on the other end, coldly informing her that Julia was no longer alive. It felt like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. She couldn't believe it, thinking it must be some kind of cruel, senseless joke. She started screaming and crying, which brought her terrified husband rushing in. From that moment, everything felt like a nightmare. According to Lyudmila Ivanovna, she and her husband quickly threw on some clothes, rushed outside, and flagged down the first car that came by, begging the driver to take them to their daughter's apartment. Within about 15 minutes, they arrived at the building on Stavropolskaya Street, where an ambulance was already parked near one of the entrances. Barely aware of herself, Lyudmila ran to the paramedics, but they just shrugged, offering their condolences and telling her there was nothing more they could do. Outside stood Yulia's mother-in-law, Leila Fairman, holding little Pasha, their 1.5-year-old grandson. Desperate for answers, Lyudmila ran over to her, but all she could gather from Helena's words was that Yulia was gone. The Naumovs then made their way up to the apartment, and what they saw was horrifying. There were faint bloodstains on the floor leading to the bathroom. Inside, lying on the floor by the door, was the lifeless body of their daughter. Her hair was tangled and matted with blood, covering her face. Her mother couldn't bring herself to approach. She started to lose consciousness and had to be carried into another room. When Lyudmila Ivanovna regained some composure, her son-in-law, Alexander, came over, thrusting a phone in her face, insisting she take a look at what her daughter had done. She could barely make sense of anything around her, but he kept pushing until she finally took the phone. Struggling to focus, she read a strange farewell letter. In this message, Yulia supposedly confessed to cheating on her husband 6 months earlier and said she couldn't forgive herself. She wrote that she didn't know how she could go on if her actions destroyed her family and ruined their child's life. The odd crime scene. At first, Alexander claimed that Yulia had taken her own life. He said that she had been overwhelmed with guilt over her alleged affair, and it consumed her to the point that she couldn't cope anymore. According to him, she had acted strangely that evening. They argued, and afterward, Yulia went into the bathroom. After some time, he noticed she'd been in there too long. When she didn't respond to his knocks, he opened the door to find her hanging from the doorknob, a hairdryer cord wrapped around her neck. He claims he tried to revive her by performing CPR, but when he realized there was nothing he could do, he called emergency services and his parents to help with the child. Only after paramedics confirmed that Yulia was gone did Alexander call his mother-in-law to inform her of what had happened. He remained in the apartment the whole time, interacting with the medical personnel and law enforcement who arrived on the scene. However, Alexander didn't behave like a grieving widower. He seemed disturbingly calm, but once Lyudmila Ivanovna arrived, he grew visibly irritated. He showed no sympathy for her. In fact, he seemed intent on making her pain even worse. Yet what truly caught the investigators' attention wasn't Alexander's odd behavior, but the state of Yulia's body. Forensic experts discovered 2 ligature marks on her neck. One was very pronounced, suggesting she had been strangled. The second mark, faint and at a different angle, indicated hanging, but seemed to have appeared after she had already died. Additionally, there were numerous other injuries on her body in various stages of healing, but more on that later. Another curious detail. Upon discovering his wife's body, Alexander's first call was not to the emergency services, but to his parents and a relative who worked at the hospital. They arrived at the scene even before the paramedics did. What was wrong with the farewell message? When her son-in-law first showed Lyudmila Ivanovna the message on her daughter's phone, she was in a state of shock, barely processing anything after losing her daughter. From the start, she doubted that her daughter had written that message, and she had good reasons to think so. First, Yulia had never sent her mother a text message before, knowing that due to her poor eyesight, her mom didn't read texts at all. Second, Yulia never addressed her mother in the way the farewell note did. Third, Lyudmila was absolutely certain that her daughter would never leave her child behind. Her whole life revolved around him. Moreover, experts determined that the message was sent after Yulia's heart had already stopped beating. Alexander explained this by claiming that Yulia might have typed the message and left it in drafts. And when he was trying to call for medical help, he accidentally sent his wife's final message to her mother without realizing how it happened. Additionally, Yulia's phone revealed a chat with a close friend, where she confided about problems in her marriage and her husband's violent behavior. Although she didn't go into much detail, it was clear she was afraid of Alexander. In one of her last messages, Julia wrote that she would stay strong for her son, as she couldn't leave him and absolutely couldn't afford to die. The initial theory. After examining Julia's body and the crime scene, investigators concluded that this wasn't a case of suicide, but a crime that had been poorly staged to look like one. Alexander immediately became the prime suspect, was taken into custody, and sent to a detention center while the investigation unfolded. At first, Alexander continued to insist that his wife had taken her own life. He accused her of infidelity, claiming that guilt and remorse drove her to such a desperate act. However, the forensic report clearly indicated that Julia had been violently killed. According to the preliminary theory, on the evening of January 3rd, the couple got into a heated argument over a trivial matter. During the altercation, Alexander beat and strangled his wife, then tried to stage her death as a suicide. On January 18th, he was officially charged with the crime. His detention period was extended, and the investigation continued. Soon after, Alexander admitted that he and his wife had a big fight that night. He confessed to hitting her and grabbing a hairdryer that was nearby, but claimed he couldn't remember what happened next. He only came to his senses when he saw Julia lying lifeless, blood on the floor, and the hairdryer cord around her neck. Alexander stated that his only concern at that moment was to make sure their 1.5-year-old son, Pavel, wouldn't wake up and see what had happened. After managing to put their son to sleep, Alexander started cleaning the bloodstains off the floor. He then moved his wife's body to the bathroom, where he hung it from the hairdryer cord on the door handle to make it look like a suicide. He insisted that he couldn't remember how he did all this, claiming he had some sort of memory blackout. The first psychological and psychiatric evaluation concluded that Alexander was fully sane at the time of the crime and was fully aware of his actions. However, in the months that followed, things began to take a dramatic turn. The funeral and custody battle. On January 5th, Julia's body was brought home from the morgue to prepare for her funeral. That same day, Alexander's parents came to the Naumovs' apartment asking for forgiveness for their son and themselves as much as they could be forgiven. After that, they left, and neither they nor anyone else from the Fairman family attended the memorial service or the burial. The funeral took place the next day, on January 6th. More than 100 people came to pay their respects to the young woman taken too soon, but not a single member of the Fairman family showed up. A few days later, after starting to come to terms with her grief, Lyudmila Ivanovna began the process of seeking custody of her grandson. She went to the proper authorities, who informed her about the documents and paperwork she needed to gather. For several weeks, she visited various specialists, including doctors and psychologists, but once all the documents were ready, Lyudmila received an unexpected refusal. The child welfare authorities decided to leave little Pasha with his paternal grandparents because they were wealthy and could provide a more comfortable lifestyle for him. The young boy now lived in a large suburban cottage in the Volsky district, and Lyudmila and her husband were only allowed to take their grandson on weekends, which they did as often as possible. So, who was really cheating? That farewell message found on Julia's phone was written and sent by her husband, the killer, as noted earlier, after she had already died. Despite Alexander denying this repeatedly, there was no doubt about it. He simply made up a fictional lover to frame the tragedy as the consequence of a guilty, unfaithful wife's remorse. He created and typed the text on the fly. A thorough investigation and witness interviews revealed that Julia had no and couldn't have had any affairs. After giving birth to her son, she devoted herself entirely to him, spending every moment by his side and hardly ever leaving him. She was even willing to endure the beatings from her abusive husband just to keep the family together, hoping that things would eventually get better for little Pasha's sake. As for Alexander, he wasn't so innocent. He had been having an affair, not even bothering to hide it. He was seen multiple times with a young woman who lived nearby, and their relationship was clearly more than just friendly or neighborly. According to Elena, Julia's cousin, she had seen Alexander and this woman embracing in his car shortly before the tragedy, but she only shared this with her mother, who later confirmed it. On New Year's Eve, Alexander started an argument with his wife, then left to celebrate the holiday with friends. And the same woman, Julia, not wanting to upset her parents, kept this to herself but confided in her best friend, someone she could always trust. The new evaluation changed everything. A second psychological evaluation conducted in May 2013 suddenly concluded that Alexander was in a state of temporary insanity when he committed the crime against his wife. As a result, the charge of murder, which carried a sentence of up to 15 years in prison, was reclassified to a crime committed in a state of temporary insanity, instantly reducing the potential sentence to just 3 years. For some reason, nobody seemed bothered by the fact that, after killing his wife, Alexander had gone to great lengths to stage her death as a suicide, which is not typical behavior for someone in a state of temporary insanity. He washed the floor to hide evidence of the beating and even sent a fake farewell message to Julia's mother, pretending it was from her. The lawyer's moves and the custody battle. Alexander's lawyer immediately pushed to change the conditions of his client's detention, and by the end of May, Alexander was released under a travel restriction order. Essentially, this meant he was free to walk around and continue his life while awaiting trial. Julia's parents were devastated by this decision and appealed to the prosecutor's office, demanding a third psychological evaluation. This time, specialists from the Serbsky State Research Center for Social and Forensic Psychiatry in Moscow were brought in, and it took about 3 months to get the results. However, the psychiatrists only reaffirmed that the accused had acted in a state of temporary insanity. As for the original evaluation, which indicated that Alexander had been fully aware and had intentionally tried to cover up the crime, it was claimed that the specialists had simply made an error, misinterpreting the accused's actions and behavior. Meanwhile, Alexander repeatedly changed his statements, describing his condition that night in a way that sounded straight out of a textbook definition of temporary insanity. The trial begins. The first hearing in the Fairman case took place on January 22, 2014, at the Kirovsky District Court in Samara. According to Alexander, the problems in their relationship began even before the wedding, when they moved in together. He claimed that Julia had a sense of entitlement and high expectations, demanding only the best. He said that the extravagant wedding, the expensive limousine, and all the luxuries were her whims, which he and his parents catered to. Alexander said that after the wedding, he and Julia tried unsuccessfully for over a year to conceive a child, which worsened their relationship, and Julia even started talking about divorce. When their son Pavel was finally born, things didn't improve. The defendant claimed that his wife was completely consumed by the baby and had no interest in him, caring only about his paycheck. Alexander's parents backed up his claims, accusing their daughter-in-law of being greedy and materialistic. Alexander described a stifling atmosphere at home that kept escalating, saying that his once-beloved wife had grown distant and he had no one to talk to about it. On the night in question, the young businessman said he and his wife had another huge fight, during which she brought up divorce again. According to him, she started yelling that she would take their son and prevent him from seeing the boy. At this point, Alexander claimed he felt his mouth go dry, his ears started ringing, and then he blacked out. When he came to, Julia was already dead. He admitted that he carried her body to the bathroom and cleaned the blood off the floor to avoid scaring their son, but he didn't explain why he decided to stage her death as a suicide. The defendant also continued to deny ever hitting his wife, dismissing the numerous bruises and cuts on her body as the result of playing rough with their child. It was clear that Alexander and the lawyer hired by his wealthy father had prepared well. The defense attorney argued that his client had committed the crime under a cumulative state of temporary insanity. This meant that Julia had allegedly insulted, humiliated, and oppressed him for a long period, creating a state of constant psychological tension. In other words, they were essentially blaming the victim for her own tragic fate. Initially, the prosecutor sought an 8-year sentence for intentional manslaughter. However, the seasoned defense attorney quickly managed to get the charge downgraded back to a crime committed in a state of temporary insanity, reducing Alexander's maximum possible sentence to just 3 years in a penal colony. A slap on the wrist for a killer. Throughout the trial, there were several odd occurrences. First, the forensic psychologist from the original panel, who had concluded that the defendant acted intentionally and was fully sane, suddenly vanished and never reappeared in court. Then, any mention of the bruises and cuts on the victim's body seemed to disappear, as if they had never existed or were somehow deemed irrelevant. Meanwhile, the victim herself was increasingly portrayed in a negative light at every hearing. On August 8, 2014, Alexander Mikhailovich Fairman was found guilty of a crime committed in the state of temporary insanity and was sentenced to just 2.5 years of probation. In other words, he didn't serve any jail time. He went back home, with his only punishment being the requirement to regularly check in with the Federal Penal Service and pay 1 million rubles in moral damages to Yulia's parents, despite the prosecution originally seeking 3 times that amount. The court took into account Alexander's supposed remorse, including the fact that he had apologized to his in-laws and that he had a young son to support. However, the Naumobs immediately announced their intention to appeal the sentence, even aiming to take it to the Supreme Court. Nevertheless, their appeals were dismissed. Their attempt to challenge the verdict at the Samara Regional Court's cassation instance was also unsuccessful. The sentence remained unchanged. Lyudmila Ivanovna pointed out that the Russian criminal code provides a harsher punishment, including actual prison time for animal cruelty. The grieving mother couldn't understand why her daughter's life was valued even less than that of a stray dog, and she continues to hope for justice. Over 11 years have passed since the tragedy, yet the case remains stagnant. According to Fairman's lawyer, Galina Kizlyakova, there was never any evidence that the crime was premeditated, and therefore the court's verdict stands. She considers the victim's mother's complaints to be baseless and purely emotional, lacking any legal substance.